Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. The shortages of GPs in England is set to become worse, with more than 1 in 4 posts predicted to be vacant within a decade, an analysis suggests. The Health Foundation study said the current 4,200 shortfall could rise to more than 10,000 by 2030 to 31. The think tank believes the government will struggle to increase the number of GPs, while demand will continue to rise, creating a bigger shortfall. The government has promised to recruit 6,000 extra GPs by 2024, but ministers have admitted they are struggling to achieve that. The analysis said the numbers entering the profession are on the rise, but this will be offset by GPs retiring or moving towards part-time working, according to current trends. The worst-case scenarios suggested more than half of GP posts could even become vacant. The analysis also warned the number of GP nurses is unlikely to increase, although the drive to recruit other health professionals into general practice such as pharmacists and physios will provide a boost, but that will not be enough to cope with demand, which is predicted to increase by a fifth by 2030 to 31. Largely because of the ageing population. Anita Charlesworth, Director of Research at the Health Foundation, said the findings were not unique to England, with pressures being felt elsewhere in the UK. It's sobering that over the next decade, things are set to get worse, not better, she said. It's critical that the government takes action to protect general practice and avoid it getting locked in a vicious cycle of rising workload, driving staff to leave, in turn creating more pressure on remaining staff and fueling even more departures. Professor Martin Marshall, Chairman of the Royal College of GPs, said the predictions were bleak and the worst case scenario would be a disaster. Our members have told us they lack the time to deliver the care that they want to deliver for patients and the patients need, he said. Department of Health and Social Care spokeswoman said that the government had invested in GPs with record numbers now in training. She added, "We are hugely grateful to GPs and their staff for the care they provide to patients, and we are working hard to support and grow the workforce." A Belfast woman who has terminal cancer has said her outlook is worse due to the 13-month delay to be diagnosed. Lisa Smith, 44, was diagnosed with advanced breast cancer in 2017. The mother of 3 had noticed changes to her breasts after childbirth and raised her concerns a number of times. She told BBC News Northern Ireland she had months of symptoms. The Belfast Trust said it understood the distress Lisa and her family were experiencing following her diagnosis. "We will contact Lisa to discuss any concerns she may have and to offer her and her family support at this time," the trust added. Lisa's cancer has now progressed to metastatic breast cancer stage 4, which means it has spread to other parts of her body, including her lungs. "I knew my body wasn't right," she said. "I should have been scanned from the start." None of the Department of Health's targets for diagnostic testing, which includes tests used for cancer, were met, according to its latest figures. In March, 48.1% of patients commenced their first treatment for cancer following an urgent referral within the 62-day target. The department target is that 95% of patients should begin treatment within 62 days after an urgent GP referral. For someone who may have cancer, getting the diagnosis and then accessing the treatment can be 2 separate but equally important hurdles to jump. Consultant medical oncologist Martin Eatlock said it was his impression they were seeing more patients with a later stage of diagnosis over the last 18 months to 2 years than they did prior to the coronavirus pandemic. For some patients, it means that they have progressed to a stage where we are no longer able to offer them effective treatments, he said. At the end of March, 156,270 patients in Northern Ireland were waiting for a diagnostic test, a rise of 13.9% compared to the same quarter the previous year. These figures taken in anyone waiting for a test for any reason, and Northern Ireland's record is the worst in the UK. Cancer Research UK identified 8 of the tests included in the figures that are predominantly used for cancer, including gastroscopy, colonoscopy and MRI. Lisa said getting diagnosed was very difficult and she had persisted for 13 months while pregnant and breastfeeding. During that time, Lisa was seen by her GP surgery on 3 occasions and was given cream and antibiotics as it looked like mastitis, inflammation of the breast. A referral to the breast clinic also diagnosed mastitis at the IT consultant that was told a scan was not possible as she was breastfeeding. When I went back to the breast clinic the second time, I said, "This has been going on for 13 months. Please scan me. I'm not leaving until I am scanned." A mammogram, then an ultrasound, found a 6-centimeter tumour and cancer in 20 lymph nodes. The cancer result was devastating for Lisa, her husband Simon and their 3 boys. "My advice is to insist on a scan. No one knows what is going on inside your body by just looking at you," she said. "I should have been scanned from the start. I don't know why I wasn't, probably because I was pregnant and breastfeeding." BBC News Northern Ireland can reveal that in the Northern Trust area, the number of people being seen within 14 days for suspected gynecological cancer has fallen significantly. These cancers include ovarian and cervical. A Freedom of Information request showed that in 2018, 49% of those referred were seen within target. In 2021, it fell to just 13%. The number of referrals seen within 15 to 28 days was 41% in 2018 and 27% in 2021. In the Belfast Trust, 84% of patients with suspected gynecological cancer were seen within target in 2018, and by 2021 it had fallen to 65%. In the South Eastern Health Trust, the longest wait in 2018 for a red flag gynae cancer referral was 48 days. Fewer than 5 out of 1,962 patients waited this long. In 2021, the longest wait was 108 days. Fewer than 5 out of 2,195 people waited this long. In the Southern Health Trust, the longest wait for a suspected gynecological cancer referral was 12 weeks, which affected 5 patients. In 2021, the longest wait was 51 weeks, affecting 5 or fewer patients. Mr. Etok said the lack of executive and political leadership means there is no impetus to apply Northern Ireland's new cancer strategy. Without political leadership, without a proper funding package for cancer and the cancer strategy, it is difficult to see how the situation is going to improve anytime soon. Lisa said she will never know the difference the 13 months may have meant. I've been unlucky because I have an aggressive form of breast cancer, but lucky because it has targeted drugs and the tumours have all gone, bar one which might be scarred tissue, she said. I don't know what is going to happen. That is just the reality of living with breast cancer. Might it progress? Yes, unless they find a cure for cancer within the next few years. Lisa is a keen rower and continues with sport for physical and mental health. She climbed the 7 highest peaks in the Mournes in one day shortly after learning the cancer had spread to her lungs. Simon and Lisa have told the boys that mummy is sick and has cancer. Lisa said it was important to talk to children about cancer and to be completely honest. Jake, who is 9, and the eldest know it has spread, she said. He does ask difficult questions like, are you going to die? I have to be honest and say we are all going to die sometime, but hopefully not soon. It's better that they hear it from me and Simon and not in the playground, and it's important not to catastrophize things. Airbnb has permanently banned parties and events at homes on its platform after a temporary measure during the pandemic proved popular with hosts. The firm says the rule has become much more than a public health measure since it was introduced in August 2020. It developed into a bedrock community policy to support our hosts and their neighbours, the San Francisco headquartered firm said. However, it also removed a limit on how many people can stay at homes. Airbnb said in a statement that the number of complaints about parties dropped by 44% since the measure was first introduced. Exceptions to the global ban may be made for specialty and traditional hospitality venues in the future, it added. Airbnb also said it would remove a limit on the number of people its listings are allowed to accommodate at any one time. It previously imposed a 16-person limit to occupants because of concerns over the spread of COVID-19. The firm said several types of larger homes are capable of comfortably and safely housing more than 16 people, from castles in Europe to vineyards in the US to large beachfront villas in the Caribbean. Removing this cap is meant to allow those hosts to responsibly utilise the space in their homes while still complying with our ban on disruptive parties, it said. The company started putting restrictions on parties in 2019. It banned open invite parties and so-called chronic party houses that were a nuisance to neighbours. During the pandemic, Airbnb introduced an indefinite ban on parties in the best interest of public health. More than 6,600 guests have also been suspended from using the platform last year for breaking the rules. This new and long-term policy was enacted to help encourage and support community safety, Airbnb said. We look forward to sharing updates in the coming weeks and months on our efforts to complement our community policies on parties, it added. British two-time champion Andy Murray has suffered his earliest Wimbledon exit as he lost in 4 sets against American John Isner in the second round. The 35-year-old former world number 1 clinched the 3rd set to keep alive his hopes, but fell 6-4, 7-6, 7-4, 6-7, 3-7, 6-4 to the big-hitting 20th seed. Isner, a 2018 semi-finalist, fired 36 aces on his way to an impressive victory on centre court. He will play 20-year-old Italian 10th seed Jannik Sinner next. Murray had never before failed to reach the 3rd round at SW19 in 13 previous attempts, but he was unable to register a break of serve against the unwavering Isner, who was executed his trademark big serving game to perfection to record a memorable win, going out just hours after British teenager Emma Raducanu lost to Caroline Garcia on the same court. Feeding off an electric atmosphere to stay in the match, Murray punched the cooling air as a looping Isner returned dropped wide to conclude the 3rd set. The crowd rising rising to their feet to offer further encouragement. But then came the sucker punch. The Britain, ranked 52nd in the world, rescued one breakpoint for Juice, but a second chance proved one too many as the 37-year-old Isner took a 3-2 lead in the fourth, with the light beginning to fade at SW19. At 4-2, play was paused to allow the roof to be closed, and following the restart, the American delivered on serve to return an age of around 0-30 deficit and move one game from victory. He was forced to serve out the contest and duly obliged, a love hold sealing a fitting end to an efficient display against the home favourite. Murray, whose Wimbledon preparations were disrupted by an abdominal injury, had come back to win his opening match against Australian James Duckworth on Monday in 4 sets. A fight back was once again required against an opponent who he had beaten in all 8 previous meetings, but Isner provided an insurmountable obstacle in their first contest on grass. It was the American who landed the first blow, drawing a couple of errors from the Scot as he broke to 15. A superb backhand winner was celebrated by the captivated crowd and helped Murray reach the first of 2 breakpoint opportunities in the following game, but a series of blistering serves ensured Isner escaped unharmed. 3 comfortable holds of serve, 2 without conceding a point, enabled the world number 24 to secure the first set relatively untroubled. In a tight second set, Murray took a moment to compose himself, head in hands, after missing a backhand down the line that would have given him a break point when leading 4-3, but with neither player faltering on serve, it fell to a tie-break to determine the extent of Murray's task. If he was to continue at SW19, he would have had to come back from 2 sets down from the 11th time in his career. Twice forced to serve to say in the tournament when trailing 5-4 and 6-5, Murray called upon his vast experience to twice hold serve to love and reach another tiebreak, and while that one went his way, it was ultimately not to be for Murray, and his faithful support as his 14th Wimbledon challenge met a premature end. Isner was magnanimous towards his beaten opponent in his on-court interview, saying, "I am most definitely not a better tennis player than Andy Murray. I might have just been a little better than him today. It was an incredible honour to play him on his court in front of the crowd. At the age I am at now, I need to relish these moments. This was one of the biggest wins of my career. To play as well as I did against one of our greatest players ever was a huge accomplishment for me. He's a massive inspiration to each one of us in the locker room, and we are so lucky to still have him around." Murray has got to go all in now. What's he going to do? Pick and choose and play every couple of months? I don't think that's going to happen. He wants to get back to a point when he's seeded at a tournament where he's in the position where he feels that he's one of the big boys again. This is a guy who has been in 11 Grand Slam finals. This has got to be an unbelievably difficult situation. What is he going to be doing in the last 4 or 5 years? And to watch Novak Djokovic do what he does, to see Rafael Nadal get to 22, he's an all-time great. Also Murray, this is rough for him. Isner rose to the occasion in this time. A very lucky angler narrowly avoided being crushed by a mound of rubble that fell from a cliff in Nottinghamshire. The suspected landslip happened near Gunthorpe Lock on the River Trent at about 5 p.m. on Tuesday. Ian Potts, who was on an island opposite the bank at the time, said the fisherman could have been killed. Nottingham Anglers Association, which owns the land, said it might need to close the area to keep members safe. Mr. Potts, 46, said he was called over by a friend just after the rubble had fallen. "I saw all the dust where it had fallen down. It took about 5 minutes for all the dust to clear after," he said. Then you could see that basically the bloke was very lucky. If it had come down where his bivvy was, he could have been killed. David Turner, the secretary of Nottingham Anglers Association, said it was the 3rd landslip in the area in the past 10 years. However, he said the other 2 were not on the association's land and were in completely different circumstances. "We've had the fishing rights down there for over 30 years and there's never been an incident like this before," he said. "We've got water bailiffs down there, and if they thought there was any problem with that cliff face or it was showing any signs of crumbling, they would have told me." He said that the angler at the bottom of the cliff had not yet been in contact to report the near miss. "For the meantime, we're going to have to block it off and tell them they can't go down there. It might be that we have to block it off permanently if there is a danger." Thank God the bloke was fishing where he was, close to the weir, because if it had been another 5 or 6 yards downstream, he probably wouldn't have been with us. Street artist Banksy is to be made an honorary professor, a university has announced. The University for the Creative Arts, UCA, which has campuses in Kent and Surrey, is recognising him for his humanitarian efforts and the impact he has had on the global arts scene. The award will take place at the Royal Festival Hall in London on the 6th of July. UCA said Banksy will not be attending and the honour will be conferred on an empty chair. Famed for his stenciling combining humour with graffiti, as well as his 2010 Academy Award nominated film Exit through the gift shop, Banksy's identity has long remained a mystery. Professor Terry Park, a UCA Assistant Vice-Chancellor, told BBC Radio Surrey, Banksy has been overlooked in the past. He's a bit of an art world outsider in terms of the elite of the art world, but he's certainly impacted the art world and the general public's imagination, and we wanted to mark that at our university. Professor Park said UCA had contacted Banksy via his representatives, and he had acknowledged our intention to confer the award. Professor Bashir Makhul, UCA's President and Vice-Chancellor, said he is an example that UCA students can look up to, who uses his talents to disrupt the status quo while challenging us all to confront some of the key issues of our time: war and peace, inequality, and art's role as a vehicle of social expression. Tributes have been paid to a world-renowned neuroscientist and University of Oxford professor. Professor Sir Colin Blackamore, FRS, who had motor neuron disease, passed away on Monday aged 78, Magdalen College announced. The university professor and scientist specialised in vision and the development of the brain. Sir Colin was also known for defended medical research on animals despite death threats. He once told the BBC, "There were times I was shocked by what happened to me, razor blades in envelopes, bombs, threats against my kids, but I never doubted the principle of public engagement. It's important for science to be in the public arena, including the difficult things such as animal research, climate change, or stem cells." He was knighted in 2014 for his research and for communicating the importance of often controversial science. David Patterson, head of the Department of Physiology, Anatomy and Genetics at the university, described him as passionate and profoundly influential. He said he significantly contributed to our understanding of vision and how the brain develops and adapts. He was born in Stratford-upon-Avon in 1944, gaining a first-class honours degree and MA in medical sciences at Cambridge and a PhD at Berkeley. He's the youngest person to give the BBC Radio 4 Reith Lectures in 1976, the youngest person to be appointed Wayfleet Professor of Physiology at Oxford in 1979, Professorial Fellowship at Magdalen between 1979 to 2007, he was the Director of the McDonnell Pew Centre for Cognitive Neuroscience between 1990 to 1996, the Director of the Oxford Centre for Cognitive Neuroscience between 1996 to 2003, Chief Executive of the Medical Research Council between 2003 and 2007, Professor of Neuroscience at Oxford and a Supernumerary Fellow at Magdalen for 2007 to 2012, Professorship of Neuroscience and Philosophy at the School of Advanced Study, University of London 2012, made an Emeritus Fellow at Magdalen and the Department of Physiology, Anatomy and Genetics. Andrew King, Wellcome Principal Research Fellow and Director of the Centre for Integrative Neuroscience, said he was spellbound by Sir Colin's lectures. He said his remarkable ability to communicate science and to publicly and bravely address issues like the need for using animals in medical science also made him stand out. Humanist UK, of which Sir Colin was patron, said his career was not without controversy, but he was always courageous in the pursuit of scientific progress, even when faced with violent opposition. His experience of nearly being assassinated with a parcel bomb only strengthened his resolve to promote better dialogue between scientists and the public. Tributes were also paid by Professor A.C. Grayling, who called him a brilliant scientist and a lovely, friendly man. Professor Richard Dawkins, who said he was a brilliant communicator of science, highly articulate but never intimidating, and Professor Jim Al-Khalili, who said he was a true giant of British science. The widow of a farmer murdered by the IRA has warned the government not to trample on victims as MPs prepare to vote on the government's Troubles legislation. The bill offers an amnesty to those accused of killings and other Troubles-related crimes. The debate and vote comes almost to the day that Iris Moffat Scott marks the 39th anniversary of her husband Melvin's murder. He was shot in his tractor in 1983. No one has ever been convicted for the murder of the 36-year-old father of four who was cutting hedges near Oman at the time. The killing was blamed on the IRA. That day, Melvin put my youngest son on the bus for his first day at school, and he never saw his daddy alive again, says Mrs. Moffat Scott. He was a 36-year-old farmer doing a day's work when he was murdered by Republican terrorists. Those brave men who shot an unarmed civilian in the back never had the courage to admit to the murder. The government's contentious Troubles legacy bill is starting its committee stage in the Commons, meaning amendments can be debated in the chamber. Northern Ireland Troubles legacy bill, published by by the UK government. The Democratic Unionist Party DUP Alliance and SDLP opposed the bill and have put forward proposals, but not all will be chosen for a vote. Mrs. Moffat Scott said victims across Northern Ireland were not even an afterthought for the government. I'd ask the British government to put victims where they should be and don't trample on them and don't treat them differently than victims of terrorism in any other British city, she said. I would invite Boris Johnson to look at my children and grandchildren in the eye to see the impact and the suffering of putting terrorists before victims. Mrs. Moffat Scott also said the focus should remain on the lack of truth coming from the IRA and Sinn Féin about what happened during the Troubles. Meanwhile, the niece of a Belfast schoolgirl who died after being hit by a plastic bullet fired by a soldier also criticised the government's Troubles bill. Charlotte McCurry, whose aunt Julie Livingston was killed in 1981 at the age of 14, said truth and justice were vital for reconciliation and to allow people to move forward. No victims support this, and I don't think anybody wants an amnesty for those who were involved in murder during the Troubles, she said. Mrs. McCurry said her family had given up hope of ever getting justice, but she said files on the case had been locked by the government until 2064, which she said was unacceptable. By then, my aunt's brother and sisters will no longer be around, but we are determined to carry on the fight for Julie, she said. Mrs. McCurry joined a number of other relatives of victims at Westminster on Tuesday night for a production of victims' testimonies. It was hosted by the SDLP leader Colin Eastwood. We felt it was important to let MPs hear at first hand about the victims and how their families have suffered, in the hope it may influence how they vote on this bill, explained Mrs. McCurry. An ex-Canadian government IT worker has admitted to being a high-level hacker with a Russian cybercrime group. Sebastian Vakon Desjardins from Quebec, Canada, has agreed to plead guilty in a Florida court. The 34-year-old was affiliated to the NetWalker ransomware crew, which has attacked companies, municipalities, hospitals, schools, and universities. When he was arrested, police discovered he was in possession of £22.2 million in bitcoins. The case represents a rare example of a successful arrest and prosecution of a hacker working for a Russia-based cybercrime group. US court documents state that the Canadian was one of NetWalker's most prolific affiliates. Evidence gathered by police shows he went on a hacking spree between April and December 2020, attacking 17 Canadian companies and many others around the world. NetWalker operated a ransomware as a service, a criminal business, offering its malicious software and extortionate website to hacker affiliates. The leaders, who are still at large, communicate in Russian online and ensure that their malware does not infect Russian computer systems or those of former Soviet countries, which are now members of the Commonwealth of Independent States. Affiliates like Mr. Vakon Desjardins are responsible for identifying and attacking high-value victims with the ransomware. NetWalker developers and affiliates split the ransomware, or if the victim refuses to pay, a share of the money made from selling the stolen data. Mr. Vakon Desjardins was arrested in Canada in January 2021 and subsequently extradited following a US investigation into the cybercrime group, which dismantled its online operation and uncovered a database of affiliate details. It revealed the NetWalker group had roughly 100 members, including affiliates who extorted at least $40 million from victims. In one incident, the group extorted $1.1 million from a US university trying to develop a COVID-19 vaccine. A NetWalker attack on the Dusseldorf University clinic in September 2020 is also believed to have contributed to the death of a patient who had to be relocated to another hospital for treatment. In each incident, the victims would find a note on their computers reading, "Hi, your files are encrypted by NetWalker. Our encryption algorithms are very strong and our files are very well protected. The only way to get your files back is to cooperate with us and get the decryptor program. For us, this is just business." Police seized dozens of computers and storage devices, 719 Bitcoin worth approximately £22 million and 790,000 Canadian dollars in cash from Mr. Vakon Desjardins' house. The hacker is a former IT consultant for Canada's Public Works and Government Service Department. On his LinkedIn profile, he says he worked for various government departments from 2010 onwards and cites expertise in responding to cybersecurity incidents. He is pleading guilty to one count of conspiring to commit computer fraud and one count of transmitting a demand in relation to damaging a protected computer. The court has agreed not to proceed with two other charges. He will be sentenced at a later date and could face up to 10 years in prison. Ghost broking, it's a term you may not have heard of before, but it's thought up to 21,000 people in the UK have fallen victim to this car insurance scam. People should safeguard their personal finances against fraud amidst the cost of living crisis, warns the Insurance Fraud Bureau, IFB. It comes after an investigation by which found a scam has given motorists fraudulent cover. Last year, 517 reports were made by victims, according to Action Fraud. Young and vulnerable people are constantly being targeted online with fake car insurance deals, said Ben Fletcher, director at the IFB. The IFB says insurers last year collectively reported more than 21,000 policies that could be connected to the scam. The cost of living crisis means it's never been more important for people to safeguard their personal finances against fraud, he added. More people looking for cheaper deals can be an addictive to the scam, according to cybersecurity experts and former crime officer Jake Moore. Ghost brokers can be individuals or groups that are unlicensed who pose as middlemen for insurance companies and claim to be able to find cheap car insurance prices for those struggling to get affordable cover. There are various ways of operating, including selling bogus paperwork to victims, and they'll often sell a policy that will appear against the vehicle on the motor insurance database. They may advertise on student websites or through WhatsApp and social media, Jake says. The problem, according to Jake, is they will go and cancel it without you knowing a couple of weeks later, so they'll get the money back. Then you'll be without insurance, leaving you potentially liable for fraud and at risk of penalties for driving uninsured. In 2021, ghost broking victims who contacted Action Fraud reported losses of £1,950 each on average. So what can you do to avoid falling victim to this scam? Here are the tips. People need to be very wary of brokers using just their mobile phone or WhatsApp or just their email as a way of contact, he says. And you need to really stick to the authentic roots of car insurance. If a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. For peace of mind, you can actually go and check out on the Financial Conduct Authority's website for a list of authorised brokers. If they aren't authorised, stay away. After using a broker, get in touch with the company they've given you to double check your car is insured. If you aren't insured, then you're going to be losing a lot of money than the savings you've had from using that broker. When you come across a really good deal on a shopping trip, you might share it with your friends and family. Do the same for car insurance deal. It goes back to erring on the side of caution. Why is something less than what you'd expect it to be? Is there a reason? Usually someone else points out that it could be a scam, and they might be the first one to go and search online and realise it might be part of a con, Jake adds. People don't like reporting things on social media because they think it's not going anywhere, Jake says. But if lots of people get together and do report it, then it will be seen by a human pair of eyes, and they will do what they can to block these accounts. Jake says scammers are very good at tailoring their craft and looking for ways to con people. The government really struggled with the sophistication behind these new emergent scams. They're often one step or even two steps behind. Jake has investigated these crimes for cyber police and says it's getting more difficult every day. It comes back to that education, making people aware this actually happens. So just talking about it, it makes those people be more protected. Google is facing action from a coalition of 10 European consumer organisations over the company's account sign-up process. A Google account is essential in order to use a number of its products and services, but the coalition alleges the sign-up process steers users towards options that collect more data. Google told the BBC it welcomed the opportunity to engage with consumer advocates on the topic. The company said that consumer trust depended on honesty and transparency, and it had staked our future success on building even simpler, more accessible controls and giving people clearer choices. And just as important, doing more with less data. The European consumer organisation, BEUC, which coordinates the coalition, claims the language Google uses in the registration process is unclear, incomplete and misleading, leading many consumers to pick options that are less privacy friendly. As a result, tens of millions of Europeans have been placed on a fast track to surveillance when they signed up to a Google account, BEUC claims. The consumer organisation believes sign up is the critical point at which Google asks users to choose how their account will operate. But the simplest one-step express personalization process, it alleges, leaves consumers with account settings that feed Google's surveillance activities. And the consumer organization says Google does not provide users with the option to turn all settings off in one click. Instead, BEUC says it will take 5 clicks and 10 steps to turn off the trackers Google wants to activate on a new account. Those relate to web and app activity, YouTube history, and personalized advertising on their account. Ursula Pouch, Deputy Director General of the BEUC, said it takes one simple step to let Google monitor and exploit everything you do. If you want to benefit from privacy-friendly settings, you must navigate through a longer process and a mix of unclear and misleading options. Ms. Pouch added, in short, when you create a Google account, you are subjected to surveillance by design and by default. Instead, protection should be the default and easiest choice for consumers. The EU's General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR) requires platforms to give users privacy by design and by default, but Google maintains that all options are clearly labelled and designed to be clear and simple to understand. They're based, the company says, on extensive research, guidance from regulators, and testing. It told the BBC people should be able to understand how data is generated from their use of internet services. If they don't like it, they should be able to do something about it. VEUC members in the Czech Republic, Norway, Greece, France, and Slovenia have filed GDPR complaints against Google with their respective data protection authorities, and groups in Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands have written to their own authorities about the concerns. The Federation of German Consumer Organisations has sent a warning letter to Google. As this latest action launches, the BBC has been told that a previous investigation prompted by BEUC has made progress. In 2018, members of the BEUC filed a similar complaint against Google, alleging the tech giant breached general data protection regulations requirements through user location tracking. The island's Data Protection Commission was appointed the lead authority on the complaints in July 2019. The Commission is lead data protection authority for Google and numerous other tech companies within European headquarters in Ireland. It launched an inquiry into Google's use and collection of location data in February 2020, but Ms. Palk said it is more than 3 years since we filed complaints against Google's location tracking practices, and the Irish Data Protection Commissioner in charge has still not issued a decision on the case. Meanwhile, Google's practices have not changed in essence. However, Graham Doyle, Ireland's Deputy Data Protection Commissioner, told the BBC that our investigation into Google and location data is well progressed, and we expect to send a draft decision to our colleague data protection authorities in the next couple of months for their views. Passengers have complained of queues and total chaos at Heathrow after the airport asked airlines to remove 30 flights from Thursday's schedule. The UK's largest airport asked airlines to cut the flights because it was expecting more passenger numbers than it can currently cope with. Some passengers did not know that their flights were cancelled until they arrived at the airport. Heathrow said the cancellations were necessary for safety. Travel writer and broadcaster Andy Moffat tweeted that there was total chaos and zero customer service at the airport on Thursday morning. Another passenger tweeted that Terminal 5 was disgraceful shambles after he arrived on Thursday morning to find his flight cancelled. PA reported that one passenger, Andrew Douglas, said he had spent 4 hours in queues to find out at check-in that his flight had been cancelled with no prior notifications. Other travellers complained of poor customer service and a lack of help when trying to rebook their flights. A Heathrow spokesman said, "We will work with airlines to get affected passengers rebooked onto other flights outside of the peak so that as many as possible can get away, and we apologise for the impact this has had on travel plans. We are working hard to ensure everyone has a smooth journey through Heathrow this summer, and the most important thing is to make sure that all service providers at the airport have enough resources to meet demand." A spokesman from British Airways, one of the airlines affected, said, "As a result of Heathrow's requirement for all airlines to reduce their schedules, we've made a smaller number of cancellations." The airline said it was in contact with affected customers to apologise, advise them of their consumer rights, and offer them alternative options, including a refund or rebooking. Virgin and Atlantic said one of their Heathrow to New York return services had been cut in each direction, while Air France, KLM, American Airlines, Delta Airlines, Lufthansa, Aer Lingus, Brussels Airlines and Air Canada are also affected. Earlier this month, around 5,000 people were hit by Heathrow cancellations because of technical issues affecting baggage. Before that, tens of thousands of passengers had been affected by disruption at UK airports and flight cancellations during the week of the Platinum Jubilee and half-term holidays. The disruption was caused by several factors, but staff shortages have left the aviation industry struggling to cope with resurgent demand. The Japanese company behind the Hello Kitty brand has struck a licensing deal in China after one of its lesser-known characters went viral in the country. Sanrio says a unit of e-commerce giant Alibaba will have exclusive rights in China to make all and sell merchandise of its 26 characters. The deal comes after Sanrio's imp-like rabbit Kurumi featured in a Chinese social media video that went viral. Shares in Sanrio closed almost 14% higher in Tokyo trade on Thursday. The company said in a statement that the 5-year agreement with Alifish, Alibaba's licensing and entertainment business, will further enhance the Sanrio brand and character value in the Chinese mainland market. The deal covers 26 characters that Sanrio has designed, including Hello Kitty, her best friend My Melody, and the devilish Kuromi. Earlier this year, Kuromi surged in popularity in China after an influencer danced in outfits inspired by Sanrio characters. The video on the Douyin, the version of TikTok available in China, was posted by Helen Toftroy, who has more than 14 million million followers. Hiromi's birthday is on Halloween, and she is described as a tomboy who's actually very girly. According to Sanrio's official website, she enjoys writing in a diary and reading romance novels. Although Hello Kitty typifies the Japanese culture of kawaii or cuteness, the company has said that she is a British schoolgirl called Kitty White who lives just outside London. The brand has generated billions of dollars since its inception almost 50 years ago. Goods branding with a mouthless cartoon adorned with a trademark hair bow are sold in 130 countries worldwide, with a range extending from Prosecco to Plimsolls. Sanrio has also licensed for amusement parks and cafes, while in 2018, a Japanese railway firm splashed the image on its bullet train, painted in pink and white. However, Sanrio, whose business has been declining for several years, was affected badly by the coronavirus pandemic. Measures to slow the spread of COVID-19 resulted in the temporary closure of the firm's theme parks and stores. Despite the restrictions, Sanrio's sales in China grew 39% to 4.7 billion Japanese yen in the year to March this year. Its profits in the country jumped 19% during the same period. In 2020, the company saw the first change in leadership in its 6-decade history. That came when its founder Shintaro Tsuchi, then aged 92, handed over control of the company to his grandson Tomo Kuni Tsuchi. Staff at a hospital with 1,500 props supporting its roof have had to plan where to place buckets where it rains. Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Kings Lynn, Norfolk, has steel and wooden posts in 56 areas. Karen Strong, head of nursing for medicine, said staff knew exactly where the buckets would need to go to catch water when rain was forecast. It's not what staff want to experience, and it's not what the staff want for the patients either, she said. You walk down a corridor, you walk down a bay, and we've got buckets catching water. As you can imagine, if you're a patient lying in a bed and looking up, it's really quite a frightening experience for the patient. Last year, hospital board papers said the situation posed a direct risk to the life and safety of patients. Jackie Rushbrook said her husband Reg, who has been in hospital for 2 weeks, was quite frightened by the props. He mentioned it when he first came in, she said, while praising the quality of nursing care. She added, I think when he's in bed and that's all he can see, it's frightening sometimes for him. Caroline Shaw, hospital chief executive, reassured patients the roof was safe and said a team was checking it on a daily basis. She understood some patients might find the situation frightening and said staff were doing all they could to explain the situation to patients. Miss Shaw, who previously ran a city hospital in Nottingham, said she was hugely shocked by the environment here and by the state of the hospital, and I guess really by the lack of capital investment in the past. She said she was absolutely determined to get a new hospital. In 2020, the government announced 40 hospitals would be built by 2030 as part of a package worth $3.7 billion, with a further 8 schemes invited to bid for future funding. The trust is waiting to hear if it will be one of those 8 across England that we've chosen to get a new hospital. The hospital opened in 1980 and was one of 7 hospitals built using a material called reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete. This material has serious weaknesses and is deteriorating, with uncertainty over its structural integrity, leading to more than £100 million being spent this financial year on safety measures across the affected sites. Instagram is exploring new ways for teenagers to verify their age and comply with platform rules. The Meta-owned app is testing video selfies with facial analysis software as a new age verification method. Some users on Instagram try to skirt its 13+ age rule by editing their date of birth to make them appear over 18. But US teens attempting this will now be given 3 ways to verify age. They can upload their ID, ask 3 adult users to vouch for them, or take a video selfie. Meta says it hopes the new methods will ensure teens have an age-appropriate experience on Instagram. The tech giant has previously faced criticism over teen and child safety on its platforms. Several US states probed Instagram last year over children's experiences on the phone sharing app, in response to leaks from Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen. Will Gardner, OBE Chief Executive of ChildNet and Director of the UK's Safer Internet Centre, says the trial is encouraging. The potential is there to try and help protect children from content which isn't for them and make their internet experience more age appropriate. Five Rights Foundation, a UK organisation campaigning for child safety in the digital environment, says such efforts are long overdue. Platforms should leave behind the don't look but don't see attitude that has led to millions of children being put at risk, Five Rights says, adding that simply knowing the age of your users is not enough. Parents and guardians of teen Instagram users were given additional tools to supervise their child's experience on Instagram earlier this month. They can now set up time limits and view details of any reports their child takes on the platform. Teens will also be nudged to look at other content if repeatedly viewing the same topics on Instagram's Explore page, and encouraged to take a break if continuously scrolling through Reels. Video selfies have become a popular way for digital platforms such as online banking apps to verify users' age or identity. Instagram currently uses video selfies as one way account holders can verify their identities if they get locked out their accounts. Meta has partnered with UK digital identification provider Yoti, whose technology estimates age by analysing human faces and facial features. Yoti says its algorithm, trained on anonymous people's facial images and their date of birth, cannot identify individually users or anything about them except their age. Its latest white paper, published in May, said the technology was accurate for 6 to 12-year-olds with an error range of 1.36 years and an error range of 1.52 years for 13 to 19-year-olds. Meta says both companies will delete the image once the user's age has been confirmed. Meanwhile, social vouching allows users to ask 3 mutual followers to confirm their age. Those being asked to confirm how old a user is must be at least 18 and cannot be vouching for any other users at the time. Dr. Isabel Gerard, lecturer in digital media and society at the University of Sheffield, says Instagram's new age verification methods are a welcome addition to just asking users to upload ID. But she says relying on age verification tools as a way to protect young people online can overlook why they actually try to create adult accounts in the first place. A lot of them are saying they're 18 on Instagram, not to do bad things or view bad content. Dr. Gerard says being technically registered as an adult makes them feel safe because they don't think they're going to be targeted. For Dr. Gerard, Instagram's new verification mechanisms raise larger questions about what helps children to feel safe on social media platforms. Pretending to be an adult is one of them. It's a harsh reality, but we can't pretend it's not happening. Kraft Heinz, the company behind some of the UK's most popular food brands, has stopped supplying Tesco with most of its products in a dispute over pricing. "We're sorry that this means some products aren't available right now," a Tesco spokesperson has said. A range of Heinz items are affected, according to the Grocer magazine, which first reported the falling out. Baked beans, ketchup and tomato soup are among the products understood to be affected. In recent months, food manufacturers have reported rising costs, including for energy and commodities, with some warning they would need to raise the prices they charge to retailers. However, supermarkets such as Tesco are striving to keep prices low for customers facing a cost of living squeeze and shopping more carefully. Tesco has pushed back, suggesting there were plenty of alternatives to choose from, but the grocer won't want to lose Heinz products from its shelves for long, given that they are staples in many UK households. "We hope to have this issue resolved soon," the Tesco spokesperson said. Kraft Heinz said it was working closely with Tesco to resolve the situation as quickly as possible, but referred to today's challenging economic environment with commodity and production costs rising. A Kraft Heinz spokesman said the firm always looked at how it could provide value through price, size and packs at a price point that works within their budgets. "We are confident of a positive resolution with Tesco," the spokesperson added. A Tesco spokesperson said the supermarket giant was laser focused on keeping the cost of the weekly shop in check. "With household budgets under increasing pressure, now more than ever, we have a responsibility to ensure customers get the best possible value, and we will not pass on unjustifiable price increases to our customers. Not all Kraft Heinz products are affected." Earlier this year, Colgate toothpaste disappeared from Tesco shelves after a similar fallout with US consumer products giant Colgate-Palmolive. Unusually high numbers of octopus have been seen along the Cornish coast this month. Cornwall Wildlife Trust said it has been a bumper year for sightings. Divers and snorkelers have reported increasing numbers, and one fisherman caught 150 in a day, compared to his usual total of 1 or 2 a year. CWT said the last significant population boom for octopus was recorded on England's south coast, recorded in 1948. It is not known whether this year will classify as the first octopus boom in more than 70 years. The common octopus is a large species and is usually recorded by CWT once or twice a year on average. Matt Slater, marine conservationist of an officer at CWT, said, "I got really excited when I started receiving messages from our sea search divers, not only because sightings of these striking animals are few and far between, but because they've seen several of them on one dive. They are such amazing alien creatures, one of the most intelligent animals in our oceans, and to witness a population explosion in our local waters would have been incredible." Local fishermen along Cornwall's south coast have also witnessed large numbers of octopus in their lobster pots and cuttlefish traps. One Mevagissey fisherman reported catching 150 octopus in a day compared to his usual catch of 1 or 2 a year. The common octopus is known for its large eyes, soft bag-like body and tentacles which can span up to 1 meter. The Marine Biological Association has reported on octopus plagues along the south coast of England from Land's End to Sussex, first in 1899 and most recently in the summer of 1948. Mr. Slater said, "We hope this is a sign that octopus populations are healthy in our Cornish waters, but sadly not all of our marine life is thriving. By taking action for wildlife and recording your marine sightings with us, we can build up a picture over time and confirm if occurrences like this are a one-off or if octopus populations are steadily on the rise." MPs should not be allowed to bring their babies into the Commons chamber, a cross-party committee has said. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle asked the Procedure Committee to review the rules after Labour's Stella Creasy was told in November 2021 she could not have her baby son with her. The review concluded the long-standing practice of barring babies from Commons debates should remain in place, but it said discretion could be exercised, albeit sparingly. Ms Creasy expressed her disappointment in the review, saying she had hoped it would make parenting and politics possible to mix. This committee didn't speak to a single person outside of Parliament, despite many of us encouraging them to do so, she said. So I'm not surprised they don't recognise who is put off Parliament by its antiquated rules. Change will only come when we start listening to those outside the status quo. The issue was raised in November last year when Miss Creasy brought her newborn son into a debate in Westminster Hall, which is part of the Houses of Parliament. She said she had previously taken a son and before him her daughter into the Commons chamber. But after taking her young son into Westminster Hall, she was emailed by Commons authorities telling her rules prohibited bringing children to debates. This prompted Sir Lindsay to ask the Procedures Committee to review the rules, but the committee concluded that the long-standing practice should not be changed if the MP involved wanted to observe, initiate, speak or intervene in proceedings. It noted that there had been several occasions when MPs had brought babies into debates without disruption, but said this had contributed to some confusion and a gap between the practice and the rules. However, it added that chairs would retain a degree of de facto discretion, which should be exercised sparingly. The firm expectation should remain that members do not participate in proceedings while caring for a baby. When the review was initially ordered, Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab said he had a lot of sympathy for Miss Creasy and he would not be distracted by a baby, but he added it was for the House authorities to decide the right balance. Conservative MP Alicia Kearns argued the Commons was no place for a baby. In no professional workplace would you feed your baby in a meeting with your chief executive, or in a pinch to new clients, or on a stage in front of shareholders. The Rutland and Melton MP, who announced the birth of her second child in January 2021, added, "I've asked to leave debates to feed my child a few times. I have never been turned down." Former Liberal Democrat leader Jo Swinson is thought to have been the first MP to take her baby into the chamber during a debate when she cradled her son in the Commons in 2018. On a separate issue, Karen Bradley, the Conservative MP who chairs the Procedure Committee, said a debate should be held in the coming weeks to discuss the extension of proxy voting. It could mean, for example, MPs being able to vote even if long-term illness meant they could not make it to Westminster. Slowly but surely, the proportion of the global ocean floor that's been properly mapped is rising. It's now up to just shy of a quarter of the total area underwater at 23.4%. Better seafloor maps help us with navigation and conservation, among many other uses. Some 10 million square kilometres, 3.8 million square miles of new bathymetric data was added in the past year. This is an area broadly equivalent to the land surface of Europe. The update was given at the second UN Ocean Conference taking place this week in Lisbon, Portugal. Much of this additional data comes not from recent mapping efforts, however, but simply as a result of governments, institutions and companies agreeing to open up their archives. It's thought a further 10 to 15% is still squirreled away on servers, in part because the owners worry they might be giving away commercial or defence secrets if they release the information. But they needn't really worry, said Jamie Michael Phillips, director of Seabed 2030, the organisation that is trying to coral world efforts to obtain a complete picture of Earth's ocean bottom. One of the messages we're trying to get across is that we don't require high resolution data. High res is nice, we can work with it, but low resolution is perfectly acceptable. One depth value is an area the size of a European football pitch, 100 metres by 100 metres or thereabouts, isn't going to give away national or commercial secrets. This knowledge is needed for a host of reasons. Sea maps are essential for safe navigation, obviously, but also for fisheries, management and conservation. Marine wildlife tends to congregate again around the underwater mountains. Each seamount is a biodiversity biodiversity hotspot. In addition, the rugged seafloor influences the behaviour of ocean currents and the vertical mixing of water. This is information required to improve the models that forecast future climate change, because it is the oceans that play a pivotal role in moving heat around the planet. At the moment, our knowledge of just over 3/4 of the planet's underwater terrain comes only from low-resolution satellite measurements that have inferred the presence of tall seamounts and deep valleys from the gravitational influence these features have on the sea surface. Water piles up over the mass of a large submarine mountain and dips slightly where there is a trench. It's super smart, but an underwater mountain that's hundreds of meters tall can still fail to show up in such observations. Seabed 2030, which is funded by Japan's Nippo Foundation, is encouraging anyone who ventures away from the land to switch on their sonar equipment and take depth soundings. And this isn't just about measurements from big ships. Small ocean-going yachts fitted with data loggers can also make a contribution. One of Seabed 2030's stars is the American adventurer Victor Vescovo. The Texan financier is using the submersible to visit the deepest places in the world's oceans, but everywhere he goes, his support ship switches on its echo sounder. "We have a map, the gap strategy," Mr. Vescovo told BBC News. "We're not a commercial outfit, so we don't have to follow the most fuel-efficient routes. When we go on an expedition, we ask, what are your proximity areas, and we divert a little bit to cover these areas." The former US Navy reservist has himself contributed over 3 million square kilometres. It's clear, however, that to come close to obtaining a full picture of Earth's ocean bottom, there will need to be a step change in approach and capabilities. Many parts of the world are so remote, few ships will visit them, let alone acquire depth data in those regions. To map these places is going to require direct tasking of autonomous or semi-autonomous technologies. There is a glimpse of how this will work in one line of data featured in the map at the top of this page. It was gathered by the sail drone surveyor on a cruise between San Francisco and Honolulu last year. During this 28-day voyage, the robot boat mapped 22,000 kilometers of sea floor. Sail drone is 22 meters in length, but truly huge autonomous vehicles are coming. The marine robotics company Ocean Infinity is currently building a fleet of 78-meter long ships in Vietnam. Regulations will probably mean they have to be lean crewed for the near future, but the goal eventually is to have them roving the ocean floor without anyone aboard. Their work would be overseen from satellite-linked control centres in the UK, the US, and a third location somewhere in Asia. Such ships could be sent out on long missions to map hard-to-reach areas at much lower cost than would be incurred by a conventional crewed vessel. New laws governing biometric technologies are urgently needed, an independent legal review led by Matthew Ryder, QC, has found. Biometric data includes faces, fingerprints, voices, DNA profiles, and other measurements related to the body. Technologies using this data, such as live facial recognition, are increasingly common, but the review found rules in England and Wales were fragmented, unclear, and had not kept up with technology. Biometric technologies, it noted, previously used almost exclusively in policing, are now used by a growing number of private and public organisations, including employers, schools and shops. More novel tools such as gait analysis, which looks at distinctive features of how people walk, or keystroke analysis based on how people type, are also being deployed. In a separate paper, the Ada Lovelace Institute, which commissioned the review, cited a number of examples of how biometric technologies were being used. Schools using facial recognition technology to verify students' identities in order for them to pay for their lunch. A supermarket chain using facial recognition to alert staff to individuals with a history of theft or antisocial behaviour. Companies using an artificial intelligence system to score video interviews with job candidates for characteristics such as enthusiasm, willingness to learn, conscientiousness and responsibility, and personal stability. Better laws and regulations would subject such uses to much greater scrutiny before deployment, it says. Currently, an institute spokesperson told the BBC, regulators were only taking action after the fact. We can think of this as a regulatory whack-a-mole, which we are arguing is inadequate, the spokesperson said. And none of these given evidence to the review thought the current legal framework fit for purpose. A range of laws influence how biometric data can be collected and used, including the Human Rights Act 1998, the UK General Data Protection Regulations, the Data Protection Act 2018, Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, Protection of Freedoms Act 2012, the Terrorism Act 2000, Investigatory Powers Act 2016 and the Equality Act 2010. Matthew Ryder, QC, who wrote the review, said the current legal regime is fragmented, confused and failing to keep pace with technological advances. We urgently need an ambitious new legislative framework specific to biometrics. We must not allow the use of biometric data to proliferate under inadequate laws and insufficient regulations. The Institute is now calling for changes including comprehensive legislative governing the use of biometric technologies, oversight by a national, independent and properly resourced regulatory body, a requirement for technology to meet standards of accuracy, reliability and validity and proportionality, a moratorium on systems capable of mass identification or classification in the public sector until legislation is passed. The review also made several recommendations concerning live facial recognition, where a camera system matches faces to a watch list. A number of police forces have deployed LFR, including the Metropolitan Police and South Wales Police. The latter successfully challenged in court. The review said a legally binding police code of practice governing LFR was needed, and all other use in public should be suspended until there was one covering the private sector. Biometrics and Surveillance Camera Commissioner Professor Fraser Sampson echoed the report's call for improvement, saying it needed to be comprehensive, consistent and coherent. Lady Hamley, who chairs the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee, said the current uncoordinated and confusing arrangements are inadequate. Biometric technologies have huge potential. They need an essential component, public trust and confidence, which in turn needs sound regulation. In response to the Ryder review, the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport spokesperson told the BBC the government was committed to maintaining a high standard for data protection, and our laws already have very strict requirements on the use and retention of biometric data. We welcome the work of Ada Lovelace Institute and Matthew Ryder, QC, and will consider the recommendations carefully in due course. Universities need immediate improvements so students get the mental health care they need, according to a new survey. Out of 7,200 students surveyed by charity Human, nearly half felt mental health difficulties negatively impacted their university experience. The research also revealed only 4% of staff received adequate training. Support should be given just as much value as academic results, says River Hawkins, founder of Human. The research by the mental health charity across 80 universities found 57% of students have used mental health services provided by their university, with 47% saying difficulties had a negative impact on their experience. While it's encouraging to see a number of universities performing well in Human's University Mental Health League table, all universities need to make immediate improvements, he added. Daniel Bannister started at the University of Edinburgh in September 2020 in the first year of the coronavirus pandemic and suffered with anxiety. I was thinking that I had something wrong with me. I've had issues in the past where I've discovered I had something wrong with one of my eyes, the 19-year-old physics student tells Radio 1 Newsbeat. He says COVID overloaded my brain completely in a weird way and he started thinking things were wrong with me. He feels his mental health issues definitely made me do less stuff at university. According to Human's data, 73% of men tried to access university services when struggling with their mental health. However, only 90% of male students were diagnosed with a medical professional to have a mental health condition. Daniel contacted his university and says they sent helpful emails, but that it was often a few days later that the help his parents were giving him. Instead, he received help outside of university, having cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a treatment that aims to reduce symptoms of various mental health conditions. The doctors showed me that actually there's a very tiny chance that something else was wrong with my eye. There's a higher chance that I was thinking about it and almost making it true. Ellie McNichol feels her mental health had a negative impact on her university experience, with her biggest struggle being loneliness. She was also studying during the pandemic, when lessons were mostly held online. Not being able to meet the people on your course or other people around you, the social aspect was taken away for a year and a half, the 21-year-old says. Lots of the teaching was online and Freshers Week was too. It was quite difficult meeting new people and we were stuck to our flat bubbles. That affected me more than anything. Ellie started university in 2020, first on a sports rehabilitation degree at UWE Bristol, before switching to nursing. If I was to try and join a group now, I'd probably feel a lot more anxious going to a group of people that already know each other. She feels she was lucky with the people she was with and her family that was with around her. Ellie says UWE has been very good with their care, as they gave her a well-being call every month. But there's always more that can be done, and reporting mental health issues would be easier if there was an actual person to talk to. It's difficult to see over text, and in person you can see the bigger picture. It can be so easy to type your feelings and then just hit backspace. Daniel agrees that in person support is important and can make a big difference to people. More people hear about it and realise that might be what I have as well, and then they go on and talk about it as well. The UK has announced its newest wave of sanctions targeting Vladimir Putin's inner circle, including his cousin. The Foreign Office said Anna Tisabeleva, Putin's cousin and president of a major mining firm, has been sanctioned. Vladimir Putin, Russia's second richest man and key supporter of Putin's regime, was also sanctioned on Wednesday due to the war in Ukraine. The UK government said the sanctions were intended to weaken the Russian war machine. The pair will be subject to asset freezes and travel bans. Ms. Siveleva, who runs prominent Russian coal mining company JSC Kolmar Group, significantly benefited from a relationship with the president, the Foreign Office said. Mr. Putin, said to be worth $37.1 billion or £30.5 billion, according to Bloomberg, continues to amass wealth supporting Putin's regime, the UK says. The oligarch, who heads the world's largest refined nickel and palladium producer Nornickel, has acquired Russian bank Rosbank and shares in Tinkoff Bank in the period since the invasion of Ukraine. According to the reports, he moved his $300 million super yacht to the safe haven of Dubai as a precaution. The oligarch spent $2 billion building the Rosa Couture ski resort that hosted the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, a project that he said would be his legacy, but that he hoped to get some of the money back from the Russian government. A UK government spokesperson said, as long as Putin continues his abhorrent assault on Ukraine, we will use sanctions to weaken the Russian war machine. These sanctions show that nothing and no one is off the table, including Putin's inner circle. A group of Russian individuals and companies have also been sanctioned for their involvement in supporting President Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. Russia will also be barred from accessing UK trust services, which allow a person or business to manage the assets of another. The sanctions are the latest as part of a series imposed by the UK, which has seen more than 1,000 people and over 120 businesses targeted. 3/4 of foreign companies have reduced operations in Russia, and nearly a quarter have completely withdrawn, according to the UK. It comes as Foreign Secretary Liz Truss in Madrid for a NATO summit told the BBC that the UK must not become tired or fatigued in its support for Ukraine. She said it's only possible to achieve a lasting peace, first of all when Russia are pushed out of Ukraine, secondly when Russia are held to account for the appalling war crimes that have taken place, and thirdly when we know that future Russian aggression can be prevented. We must never allow this to happen again, and we must protect the future security of Europe. She added she was also keen to help Taiwan defend itself as China builds up its armed forces. The NHS app will soon be updated with features to help offer people in England more personalised care. It is part of the government's plan for a digital revolution to speed up care and improve access while saving the health service time and money. By March 2023, more users will receive messages from their GP and be able to see their medical records and manage hospital elective care appointments. And by March 2024, the app should offer face-to-face video consultations. Some who have downloaded the app can already access some of these services. The government's ambition is for at least 75% of adults to be using it by March 2024. Currently, less than half, about 28 million, have it on their phone or tablet. The government also wants 90% of NHS trusts to have electronic patient records in place or be processing them by December 2023, and for all social care providers to adopt a digital social care record. And patients across the country should be able to complete their hospital pre-assessment checks from home by September 2024. By March 2023, NHS app users will be able to book COVID vaccines through the NHS app as well as the NHS website, receive NHS notifications and messaging including reminders and alerts for COVID-19 vaccine booking and prescription readiness, start to see notifications and messaging sent from their GP through the NHS app, start to view and manage hospital elective care appointments across participating trusts, see new information with their GP record by default with the ability to request retrospective information at their practice, access a user profile where they can set and manage contact details and register with a GP practice. Health and Social Care Secretary Sajid Javid said, "We are embarking on a radical programming of modernisation that will make sure the NHS is set up to meet the challenges of 2048, not 1948, when it was first established." Sarah Sweeney from the Health and Social Care charity National Voices said, "We welcome the ambition to use technology as an enabler for joined-up personalised care. We haven't yet realised the full power of digital tools to help achieve person-centred, inclusive and accessible care for people, and we have lots more to discover. We look forward to working with health and care leaders, health and care charities and people living with ill health and disability to explore how digital tools could be used to make what matters to people matter in health and care." Scotland could become independent if the SNP won a majority of votes in a UK election, Nicola Sturgeon has said. The First Minister wants a referendum in 2023 and is pushing for the Supreme Court to rule on a bill to set this up. If this does not happen, she has said that SNP would treat the next general election as a de facto referendum. At Prime Minister's questions in the Commons, Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab reiterated the UK government view that now was not the right time. He added that given the challenges we face as one United Kingdom, it was clear that the people of Scotland wanted their two governments to work together. In an interview with BBC Scotland, the First Minister said Scotland can't become independent without a majority of people voting for it. She said, "I hope we can resolve these things in a referendum. That is the proper way of doing it. But if all routes to that are blocked, then the general election will become the vehicle for people to express their view." Mrs Sturgeon said she wanted to be clear about the principle and the practical reality that Scotland cannot become independent unless and until a majority of people in Scotland vote for independence. She added, "The issue of practicality and reality is that when a majority vote for independence, I hope in a referendum, that will have to be followed by a negotiation with the UK government to implement that decision. If there were to be a vote in favour of Scottish independence, whether that be via the referendum Mrs Sturgeon wants or a de facto referendum based on a general election result, it would be followed by negotiations between the Scottish and UK governments. Then legislation would have to be passed at Westminster and perhaps Holyrood before Scotland became independent." Ms Sturgeon said on Tuesday that the UK Supreme Court has been asked to rule on whether the Scottish Government has the power to hold an independence referendum without agreement from Westminster. Ahead of the 2014 referendum, the UK Government agreed to a temporary transfer of powers to Holyrood to allow the referendum to go ahead. The UK Government has repeatedly insisted that it is not the time for another referendum. The idea of a de facto referendum is a radical one given Nicola Sturgeon's reputation for caution and the fact her team had previously dismissed it as a strategy. It raises many questions about how much a scheme would work, which ministers now find themselves talking about rather than their main plan to hold an actual referendum. After all, the Prime Minister's hope is the last resort will never be needed. Her wish is still to do a deal with the UK government, which would see both sides sign up to an agreed process in the style of 2014. All talk of using a general election instead is chiefly a tool to force the pro-UK side to take their fingers out of their ears and engage with the issue rather than a finalised strategy to deliver independence. Earlier on Wednesday, Ms Sturgeon's deputy John Swinney suggested that he considered a win to be the SNP winning the majority of seats contested in Scotland. He was asked on BBC Radio's Good Morning Scotland, if you have a majority of Scottish MPs at the next UK general election, that would be a mandate to start negotiations for an independent Scotland. He replied, yes, that's correct. But he went on to tweet that he had misheard the question and added that his view would be that the SNP would need to win a majority of votes in a general election, not a majority of seats. He said when he was asked about a majority of seats, he had only picked up on majority. Mr Swinney added referenda, including de facto referenda at a UK general election, or one with a majority of votes, nothing else. Douglas Ross, the leader of Scottish Conservatives, said on Tuesday that another referendum was the wrong priority for Scotland and would hinder Scotland's recovery from the pandemic. Scottish Labour's Constitution spokeswoman Sarah Boyack said the SNP were hell-bent on gaming the electorate to suit their ends. She said it was deeply embarrassing for Nicola Sturgeon to be so publicly contradicted by her own deputy. Alex Cole-Hamilton of the Scottish Liberal Democrats said less than a day after Ms Sturgeon's plans were unveiled that the wheels are falling off the clown car. He went on, they seem to have conceded that they are heading for a defeat in court and so they are brainstorming balmier schemes for what comes next. People under 35 are becoming the prime target for scammers tricking them into transferring money through social media platforms including WhatsApp. The banking industry body said intelligence suggested younger people were particularly hit by scams that played on their trust. UK Finance also warned that energy bill deal and tax scams were becoming more common as the cost of living crisis rises. Criminals were building on people's fears of rising prices, it said. The banking industry body said that while people of all age groups are falling victim to scams, it is younger age groups that are often the prime target. Our research found that people under 35 are more likely than older age groups to have been targeted in an impersonation scam and be swayed to provide personal or financial information, it said. Data from Barclays this month also showed people aged between 21 and 30 were the most likely age group to fall victim to scams, due to the majority taking place on social media, shopping sites and dating apps. UK Finance added that con artists were targeting all age groups by exploiting weaknesses outside banking system through online and social media platforms. If you've ever had money taken from your account or your bank details stolen and payments made, then you're protected by law. Ultimately, your bank should refund that money so they have a big incentive to crack down on that type of crime. It's working with a fall in the number of unauthorized transactions and record amounts of theft being prevented. The bad news for customers is that the area that is most difficult to police and prevent is the area of fraud that's growing the fastest. If you're conned into making a payment, an investment, or a transfer, then you're not going through the same legal financial protections. You should still get in touch with your bank immediately. They may be able to chase the payment, possibly return it, and some will make goodwill money back gestures, but they are not obliged to. With the younger people being targeted more by these types of scams and often more likely to fall for them, it's worth repeating the advice to just think for an extra second. Pause those speedy fingers and don't give your details straight away. The types of scams criminals were using against people have been evolving, the industry body has said. Fake delivery texts asking for payment or NHS COVID-19 pass scams during the height of the pandemic were now being replaced by schemes focusing on cost of living challenges, it said. Criminals were now posing as different organisations ranging from the NHS to banks and government departments via phone calls, text messages, emails, fake websites and social media posts. A type of fraud where people were duped into sending money and personal details surged 39% in 2021 compared with 2020 to £583 million. UK Finance has said this kind of fraud, known as authorised push payment fraud or APP, when victims think they are paying a genuine organisation, is on the rise and outstrip fraud losses on bank and credit cards, which fell by 7% in 2021 for the first time. However, less than half, 47% of the £246.8 million worth of losses were returned to victims of APP fraud. The banking trade body said impersonation scams, along with investment and so-called romance scams, were the most pernicious and prevalent. Investment fraud cases surged by 57% and impersonation scams rose 36% on 2020. Investment scams were where a criminal convinces their victim to move their money to a fictitious fund or to pay for a fake investment, accounted for the largest portion of losses APP crime in 2021, with losses increasing by 6% to 166.2 million. Meanwhile, money lost through so-called romance scams, where the victim is persuaded to make a payment to a person they have met, often through social media or dating websites, and with whom they believe they are in a relationship, more than doubled in 2021 to 30.6 million. Payment losses providers were only able to return £12.6 million, 41% of the losses from romance scams, mainly because payments were made over an extended period of time, and criminals had moved money by the time the crime was reported. Overall, £1.3 billion, the most on record, was stolen through fraud in 2021, an 8% increase from the year before. Rocio Concha, which Director of Policy and Advocacy, said the scale at which people were experiencing authorised push payment scams was shocking. Yet all too often, victims face a reimbursement lottery depending on who they bank with, she said. The government has announced its intention to enable mandatory reimbursement for banks transfer victims who are not at fault, and this needs to be brought in as soon as possible. TSB told the BBC it refunded 98% of its fraud cases in 2021, compared to 47% across all banks. Paul Davis, Director of Fraud Prevention at TSB, said it was disappointing that the industry's fraud refund rate has barely increased, with over half the money stolen by fraudsters still not refunded to victims at a time when people's finances are already being squeezed by a cost of living crisis. Katie Warbeck, Managing Director of Economic Crime at UK Finance, said there had also been a hike in investment scams where criminals set up fake cryptocurrency websites featuring celebrities, supposedly endorsing them on social media. She said upcoming legislation, Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill, provided an opportunity for the government to give new powers on information sharing and tracking stolen money. These are things we have long called for and will support efforts to work together and stop the fraud happening in the first place, she added. A dedicated card and payment crime unit, a specialist police unit that targets the organised criminal gangs behind fraud, prevented £101 million of fraud in 2021, the largest amount in the unit's 20-year history, UK Finance said. The industry body is urging customers to follow advice of the Take 5 to Stop Fraud campaign and remember that criminals are experts at impersonating people, organisations and police. People should contact their bank immediately if they think they have been conned and report it to Action Fraud. Petrol station workers are reporting growing abuse from drivers as fuel prices remain at record highs. Staff are seeing a huge increase of verbal abuse from motorists angry at the price at the pump, according to forecourt operator Ascona Group. Petrol debt recovery firm Forecourt I said staff were dealing with very combative attitudes from customers. Soaring oil prices have pushed up the cost of petrol and diesel. It now costs more than £100 to fill the average car. Fuel prices in the UK have remained at record levels for weeks as many countries reduce the dependency on Russian oil in response to its invasion of Ukraine. Nick Fisher, chief executive of Forecourt I, said petrol station staff were being confronted by customers talking about being ripped off and asking questions like, "How do you expect me to pay?" He said customers were becoming frustrated at the high prices because they had remained high and kept creeping higher. Many petrol stations rely on additional incomes made from sales of groceries, bakery items and coffee, he said, but shoppers will not buy other products from the store where they feel they are already being overcharged, he added. Darren Briggs, chief executive of the Ascona Group, said there has been a rise in the number of people who are driving off without paying for their petrol, which he linked to the cost of living pressures. The Petrol Retailers Association said that petrol theft has continued to rise across the country. Drive-off incidents where a motorist fills up and makes no attempt to pay before leaving have increased by 61% so far this year, compared with the same period in 2021, according to figures from Forecourt I. Mr. Fisher said this has been putting increased pressures on margins, and if the current rate of drive-offs continued, it would increase the costs to businesses of £25 million in lost fuel sales over a year. Forecourt I digitally traces and tracks non-payers at more than 1,000 petrol stations, and its new clients have doubled in the last 2 months due to the rise in non-payers, he said. The AA and RAC have both claimed it in the last few days that it was unjustifiable that petrol prices continued to rise whilst wholesale prices have fallen. But Gordon Bulmer from PRA insisted its members had passed on the 5p fuel duty cut introduced in March. However, the wholesale costs were very volatile and over time they had overwhelmed the fuel duty cut, he said. Mr. Briggs from the Ascona Group said petrol stations were often not making enough to recoup costs. He said other pressures on margins included a reduction in how much fuel was being sold as customers tried to save money, with the volume of sales at some sites only at 80% of its normal levels. Mr. Briggs said it would cost up to £25,000 per month to run a petrol station, covering costs such as wages, utility bills, maintenance, repairs. He said money lost by non-payment was another financial blow. Poundland is increasing the number of products it sells for £1 as retailers battle for customers. Around half of its products are priced at £1, but the business says by the end of this week, 6% of what it sells will be £1 or less. The discount chain says it is seeing a rise in customer numbers as people seek savings as the cost of living rises. Recent surveys have suggested customers are spending less on their food shop because of rising prices. Supermarkets Asda and Tesco have said customers are cutting back on shopping. Asda told the BBC that some shoppers are asking cashiers to stop scanning items when the till total hits £30 as they try to cut costs. Many customers are also switching to budget ranges. Meanwhile, Tesco, the UK's largest supermarket, has said it is seeing early signs that shoppers are changing their habits due to high inflation, the rate at which prices rise, such as buying less food and visiting more frequently. The big grocers have also been investing heavily in keeping prices as low as possible for everyday essentials, and the market is fiercely competitive. Kantar World Panel provides a monthly update into grocery spending. In its latest figures, Tesco, Aldi and Lidl were the only supermarket chains to grow their market share. Its head of retail and consumer insight, Fraser McKevitt, says there were no sign of a significant shift to bargain chains so far. Prices overall are continuing to rise at their fastest rate for 40 years, with UK inflation at 9.1%, the highest level since March 1982. Poundland boss told the BBC there is now a definite dynamic of shoppers migrating away from major supermarkets to the discounters. I think you're seeing a shift, a flight to value, if you like, from the traditional grocers, the major multiples, and into the discount channel where we operate. Most discounters are performing better at the moment, says Barry Williams, managing director of Poundland. He says customer numbers are up between 5 and 10% compared with the same period last year. Some of that increase will be down to more people returning to high streets and shopping centres post-COVID. But Mr. Williams says people are shopping around and controlling their spending as much as they can. What we're definitely seeing is customers are prioritising essential areas of spend. It's more around fast-moving consumer goods. It's more around food, perhaps a few less items in each basket. Sales of frozen food are up, a category which she says tends to perform well at difficult times as it helps shoppers manage waste. But over the last 5 to 10 years, these low-cost chains, which have steadily improved their offer, have been nibbling away at supermarket sales. Research firm Nielsen IQ, in its latest shopping survey, found that 1 in 4 households were monitoring the overall cost of their shopping basket, including seeking out their favourite brands at value retailers like Poundland and Home Bargains. Poundland has more than 850 stores across the UK. It was founded in 1990 primarily as a discount store with products at £1, including clearance lines. Over the years, the chain has expanded in its range. For instance, around half of its stores now sell clothing, and more recently it has been rolling out chilled and frozen food. Mr. Williams says with inflation soaring to its highest level in years, Poundland's £1 price point is being expanded to make it easier for customers to manage their budgets. Customers are being really mindful about how much they spend. This is a really easy way for them to control that spend as well. 2/3 of the products will be branded goods. He dismissed the suggestion that the £1 price point would be achieved by shrinkflation, where companies reduce the content of products but keep the same price. There's not shrinkflation in this, but that was something that happened in the market a number of years ago. It's certainly not what's happening right now. The Poundland boss won't be drawn on how high he thinks inflation will go, saying it only that it's not over yet. He says the big danger is that inflation gets baked in and may not come back down, and claims that the discounters from Aldi and Lidl to the likes of B&M and Home Bargains now have an increasingly important role to play in being a price anchor for the market. Without a healthy discount retailer section, without which we're fortunate to have in this market, there is a danger that prices would remain at these inflated levels. White lace, which is believed to have been used to shroud Queen Victoria's coffin, is to be auctioned. The lace, which spent years in the attic of a Somerset property, will be sold at Hanson Auctioneers in Derbyshire on the 30th of June. The portion of whole is estimated to sell for between £1,500 and £2,000. The unnamed 60-year-old seller said, "I was given the lace by my grandmother more than 40 years ago when I was a teenager. It went into my treasure box, a collection of family items I've kept since childhood. The lace has been sealed away in darkness in my attic for years. I hope that it has the ability to be preserved." Queen Victoria died aged 81 on the 22nd of January in 1901 at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. A deathbed photo shows her surrounded by white lace, while she asked to be dressed in a white dress and wedding veil, along with a white pall for her coffin. A note accompanying the lace reads, "Portion of the pall that covered Queen Victoria's coffin on her last journey from Osborne, Isle of Wight, 1st of February 1901. Naughty Hornblower textiles consultant at Hanson's Auctioneers said it is a remarkable find and very touching. In some small way, the lace reflects the overwhelming love Queen Victoria had for her husband," she said. Her request to be buried in white wearing her wedding veil and to have a white pall on her coffin suggests she was looking forward to being reunited with him. What a wonderful piece of royal history to own and cherish. It's worthy of a museum or royal collection. The findings of an investigation into the handling of allegations of bullying made against the Duchess of Sussex will remain private, says a senior Buckingham Palace source. The review, launched in March 2021, examined the response to claims about bullying of staff, but any changes to policy will not be made public. The Palace source said those taking part need to have confidentiality. The Duchess had strongly denied the allegation. Buckingham Palace's inquiry has resulted in changes to policies and procedures which would be known to all members of staff, all members of the royal family, said the royal source. This would mean improved working practices for royal staff, it was claimed. But details of what has been implemented will not be revealed, and it is not known who contributed to the investigation. Past and present employees were invited to speak about the handling of bullying claims relating to Meghan. I think one has to recognise that HR matters involving individuals are private, and that those individuals who participated in the review did so on that basis, and therefore have a right to confidentiality, said the royal source. The Palace's investigation, which used an outside legal team, followed a report in the Times with a leaked email alleging 2 members of royal staff have been driven out by bullying. The Duchess of Sussex's representatives have not commented on this latest development on the review of how the bullying claims were handled, but when the investigation was launched last year, they had rejected allegations as the latest attack on her character. They said it was particularly unfair when the Duchess has been the target of bullying herself and is deeply committed to supporting those who have experienced pain and trauma. The claims about bullying came a few days before the broadcasting of the Duke and Duchess of of Sussex's controversial interview with Oprah Winfrey. There had been an expectation that any outcome of the review would be published in the annual Sovereign Grant report showing the public funding of the monarchy. This grant covers the running costs of the working members of the royal family, such as travel, staff, and the upkeep of occupied royal palaces. The Sovereign Grant for the royal family for 2021 to 2022, based on a proportion of the profits from the Crown Estate, increased to £86.3 million from £85.9 million the previous year. Overall spending rose by £14.9 million to £102.4 million. Some of that was income from visitors to royal residences, some money from reserves, as well as the Sovereign Grant. A major cost has been the 10-year project to renovate Buckingham Palace, which meant drawing on reserves, with £55 million spent during the year, including efforts to accelerate work to be ready for the Platinum Jubilee. The most expensive trip of the year was the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's tour of the Caribbean in March, costing $226,000. A visit by Prince Charles and Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, to Egypt and Jordan in November 2021, the first overseas royal tour since the pandemic, cost £124,000, while the Duke of Kent's trip in September 2021, with a chartered flight from Norwich to Edinburgh to Norfolk, cost almost £16,000. This report does not include the Queen's private income, such as from the Duchy of Lancaster. The annual review of publicly funded finances for the years 2021 to 2022 reported sovereign grants came from £86.3 million, up from £85.9 million, 2,300 official engagements by the Queen and members of the royal family. £1.29 is the cost per person in the UK for the sovereign grant. The payroll costs £24 million, £1.3 million on housekeeping and hospitality, 9.6% of staff from ethnic minority backgrounds at Buckingham Palace compared to 8.5% in 2020 to 2021, with a target of 10%. The royal train round trips cost between £28,000 to £46,000, 179 helicopter trips costing £906,000, 24 charter flights £281,000, scheduled flights and rail trips over £210,000, and Prince Harry and Prince Andrew no longer benefit from sovereign grants. There was also a separate annual review of the finances of the Prince of Charles, Prince of Wales and his household. This is largely dependent on a £23 million private taxable income drawn from the Duchy of Cornwall. The Prince's household has a staff of around 110 people, including 4 chefs, 2 chauffeurs and 3 valets, with about 11% of the Clarence House staff from ethnic minority backgrounds. The report also shows Prince Charles as a prolific letter writer, with 1,830 personally written letters sent by him during the year, in response to some of the 50,000 plus letters sent to him by the public. A royal source said that Prince Charles was extremely conscious of the cost of living crisis affecting many people, and his charitable work would focus on communities in need of support. Graham Smith of the Republic group, which campaigns against the monarchy, says the sovereign grant failed to reflect the full public cost of the royal family, saying the funding method was absurd. Russian President Vladimir Putin would not have invaded Ukraine if he were a woman, according to Boris Johnson. The UK Prime Minister said the crazy macho invasion was a perfect example of toxic masculinity, and he called for more women in positions of power. But Downing Street said there was not a deliberate policy to publicly belittle Mr. Putin. Mr. Johnson's comments come ahead of a NATO meeting where allies will discuss how to respond to future threats. At the summit in Madrid, he is set to call on fellow members of the defensive alliance to ramp up defence spending. The UK's defence spending is projected to reach 2.3% of GDP, a key measure of the annual income of a country, this year as a result of defence industry investment, and $1.3 billion in military support for Ukraine, the government said. All NATO members have committed to spend 2% of their GDP on defence, but in 2021 the target had only been reached or exceeded by 8 countries, including the US. The spending target has been a source of tension within NATO in the past, with members pledging to work towards the 2% mark by 2024. At Wednesday's NATO summit, Mr. Johnson will say that over the next 10 years, the threats around us are only going to grow. The 2% was always meant to be a floor, not a ceiling, and allies must continue to step up in this time of crisis, he will add. On Tuesday, UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace urged Mr. Johnson to increase spending on the UK's armed forces even further, in the light of the threat posed by Russia. Mr. Wallace told the BBC he was keen to have a grown-up discussion about how much the UK spends on defence, and warned that the country could no longer bank on a peace dividend. He said this level of spending was justified given the threat posed by Russia, which has demonstrated it will take action against anyone or anybody. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said the government had been cutting defence for 10 years and that the armed forces needed a reboot in light of what's happening in Ukraine. Speaking after the G7 summit of wealthy nations in Bavaria, Mr Johnson gave an interview to German broadcaster ZDF. On gender equality and the importance of education, he said, "You need more women in positions of power. If Putin was a woman, which he obviously isn't, but if he were, I really don't think he would have embarked on a crazy macho war of invasion and violence in the way that he was," Mr Johnson said. "If you want a perfect example of toxic masculinity, it's what he's doing in Ukraine." Asked about the remarks, the Prime Minister's official spokesman said there is not a deliberate policy, adding the British public would expect leaders to be robust, with someone calling the innocent killing of civilians on a daily basis. Mr Johnson's comments about Russia's president echoed those he made during a discussion with G7 leaders at a meeting in Germany earlier this week. The leaders mocked the macho portrayal of Mr Putin, with Mr Johnson jokingly suggesting they show them our pecs to prove we're tougher than Putin. In his interview with ZDF, Mr Johnson also said that while G7 leaders desperately wanted an end to the war in Ukraine, there was no deal available currently. But he also described the summit as incredible as leaders got closer and closer to an agreement. Mr Johnson said the West must support Ukraine's military strategy in order to get President Volodymyr Zelensky in the best possible position in negotiations with Russia when talks eventually come. The NATO meeting comes after weeks that Turkey has reached a deal with prospective members Finland and Sweden, removing a final barrier to their joining. Mr Johnson said Mr Putin had been proved completely wrong in his hopes to reduce NATO dominance as the two countries move closer to joining the defence alliance. Arriving at the summit, the PM said the first lesson is that if Vladimir Putin was hoping he would be getting less NATO on his western front as a result of his unprovoked illegal invasion of Ukraine, he's been proved completely wrong. He's getting more NATO. Sandwich shops are seeing customers return after a difficult 2 years, but hybrid working and now higher food and energy prices mean that challenges remain. Paul Roth still ponders what his late father would have thought of the pandemic lockdowns. Mr Roth runs Roth & Sons, one of the oldest purveyors of sandwiches in London. The business has been in the same family since it opened in 1900. He took over from his dad in the 1960s and now looks after the business with his son Stephen. During the pandemic, I've often wondered what my father would have thought of it because he had to operate during World War II, said Mrs. de Roth. I wonder if he would have thought that the pandemic was a bigger challenge. I think it would have been more difficult to choose between the two. Unlike during the two world wars, the shop in Marylebone had to close for several weeks during the pandemic. Mr Roth says that sandwich sales are now almost back to normal as we hopefully put lockdowns behind us and people have returned to working in the office at least part of the time. We've got a long queue at lunchtime again, he says. We're not far short of where we were in 2019. Yet, while Roth & Sons says it's bounced back strongly, the wider picture for sandwich shops on both sides of the Atlantic is more mixed. Retail analyst Debbie Whirl of Springboard Research, which tracks footfall in retail destinations, says the main problems is two words: hybrid working. With many of us now only going into the office a few days a week, it is inevitable that some sandwich shops will struggle to return to 2019 sales levels. Hybrid working is very much established now. Sandwich shops, in particular in central London, are not going to have the trade they once had. Her opinion is backed by Bloomberg's Pret Index, which tracks weekly store sales figures given to it by sandwich chain Pret a Manger for London, New York, Paris and Hong Kong. Pret sales in the City of London are still below pre-pandemic levels. 2 weeks ago they were 12% lower, whereas in New York, Pret sales remains far more muted, with those at its downtown branches still only at 46% of 2019 levels. In Edinburgh, bagel shop Bros Bagels closed one of its city centre outlets during the pandemic due to a lack of its previous regular office worker customers. We decided not to renew the lease on that city centre premises, not because we weren't growing as a company, but because we just assumed that even when coronavirus was over, not as many people would return to offices, says owner Lara Boss. The firm also shut another branch in the Leith area of the Scottish capital. It now has 4 outlets across the city, with 3 in more residential neighbourhoods and therefore less affected by hybrid working. While the business is also continuing with the home delivery service that it started during the pandemic, Ms Bross says that customers have this year started to return to its outlets in larger numbers. She adds that Bros Bagels also remains active on social media, which during the pandemic helped it connect clientele. We're now seeing lots of posts from customers saying "back to work bagel." The photos of bagels have gone from people in their pajamas at their desks in their houses to back in the office, but they still have their bagels. Keyshawn Warren, owner of 2 New York sandwich, fruit shop and coffee shops called Bakelin Blend, says it was support from the local community in Brooklyn that primarily helped his business through the pandemic. He's also grateful for the initiatives launched in 2020 to support black-owned companies in the US during the pandemic, such as the Coalition to Back Black Businesses. Like many other food businesses, Brooklyn Blend refocused on delivery during the pandemic, but also had the confidence to open its second branch in September 2020. Once the lockdown lifted, people were begging us to open the indoor seating again so they could come back in and have that interaction with each other, says Mr. Warren. Now we're seeing a lot of people coming in working on their laptops. We're seeing sales go back to pre-pandemic levels. But even for sandwich bars that made it through the pandemic, there are still continual challenges in addition to hybrid working, such as rising food and energy prices. Food prices are going up all the time, and some days businesses can't get ingredients, says Jim Winship, the director of the British Sandwich Association. We've lurched out of the pandemic to now a crisis in terms of supply chain issues and rampant energy costs. Paul Roth is one of the many business owners dealing with the rising cost of ingredients. A case of butter was costing us £39.99 just after Christmas, and now it's costing us £69, he says. Most things are going up, it's just a question of keeping your finger on the pulse of profit margins. For Lara Bros, the big issue is staff shortages, which she puts down to former hospitality workers being forced to find jobs in other sectors of the economy during the pandemic. I guess it became a realization that you could work from home, you didn't have to go and serve tables, she says. I feel like the younger generation are not as inspired by hospitality like I think we were, but Miss Bros is determined to help reignite a passion for the industry. I've got lots of friends in hospitality and lots of them have lost the will, she says. I want to see it get back up and be part of the revolution, to stay positive and use our audience to show people that hospitality is fun. An inquiry has been launched into charities set up in honour of fundraising an Army veteran, Captain Sir Tom Moore. The Charity Commission has concerns about the Captain Tom Foundation, management and decisions that could have generated significant profit for a company run by his family. The veteran, who died last year aged 100, raised millions for charity, but this money is not part of the inquiry. The foundation said it would work closely with the Commission. Captain Sir Tom Moore, who was born in Keighley in West Yorkshire, gained international fame when he carried out the fundraising walk at his home in Marston Mortain, Bedfordshire, when COVID restrictions were first introduced in 2020. The £33 million raised, totalling £38.9 million including gift aid, was managed and distributed by the NHS charities together before the Just Giving account was closed down. After he became a well-known figure, his family set up a separate charity in his name called the Captain Tom Foundation, which aims to support and empower older people through fundraising and awareness campaigns. The money raised by Captain Sir Tom was separate from the formation of the charity and is therefore not part of the investigation. In March 2022, the publication of the first annual accounts of the foundation show it had incurred £240,000 in costs and given £160,000 to good causes. The Commission said it became concerned about arrangements between the charity and a company linked to Sir Tom's daughter, Hannah Ingram Moore, and her husband Colin, as well as the trustees' decision-making and how the charity was governed. The issues revolve around a failure to consider intellectual property and trademark issues, including the trademarking of variations of the name Captain Tom by a company controlled by Miss Ingram Moore and Mr. Ingram Moore. This could have generated significant profit for the company, the Commission added. Alan Stevenson, Chief Executive of the Charity Commission, said the watchdog's concerns had mounted over the charity. We consider it in the public interest to examine them through a formal investigation, which gives us access to the full range of our protective and enforcement powers, she said. Earlier this year, the Commission reviewed payment of consultancy fees to third parties, but said it was later satisfied that these specific payments were a reasonable reimbursement for expenses incurred by the companies in the formation of the charity. It added it was also satisfied that the payments were adequately identified and managed. Stephen Jones, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Captain Tom Foundation, said we will of course work closely with the Commission in its inquiry. He said the Commission was aware of where the image and intellectual property rights were held when the charity was set up. Jack Gilbert, who became chief executive of the charity at the beginning of the month, said he would ensure that in all respects, including governance and finance, the foundation conforms to best practice. A statement from the Ingham Moore family said the company controlled by Miss Ingham Moore and Mr. Ingham Moore made its application for various trademarks in April 2020, prior to the formation of the Captain Tom Foundation, which was in May 2020. Neither Hannah nor Colin Ingham Moore were trustee directors of the Captain Tom Foundation upon its formation. A new government campaign asking businesses to cut prices to help with living costs has been branded a slap in the face for small firms. The Federation of Small Businesses said asking struggling companies to soak up additional costs just isn't realistic. It's one of a number of groups who have criticised the plan for a taxpayer-funded ad campaign which involves firms slashing product prices from July. The government will be rolling out an official name with branding shortly. David Buttress, the government's new cost of living czar, has proposed the ad campaign, but a government source told the BBC that businesses will not be handed any subsidies or funding in order to cut prices. Martin McTague, national chair of the FSB, said most small firms were well beyond the point of being able to absorb extra costs without passing them on, which is often a last resort. It is the slap in the face for government to spend the extra tax it is raising from businesses on state-run marketing campaigns, doubtless focused on big businesses with corporate offers that can now be rebranded as helping the cost of living crisis and so boost their sales, he told the BBC. Asking this group to soak up additional costs just isn't realistic, especially when so many are worried about basic survival and have already cut all expenses, even necessary ones, to the bone. Mr. McTague argued that there was much more the government could do to help, such as reducing VAT rates to lift more small firms out of business rates, rather than just a marketing campaign using taxpayer resources to put government branding in shop windows. In response, the government said bringing in Mr. Buttress on an unpaid basis was the latest step taken by the government to ensure we're doing everything we can to help people in this country with a rising cost of living. He will work in partnership with the private sector to identify, develop and promote new and existing business-led initiatives that support people by encouraging businesses to do more to highlight discounted prices or product offers, a spokesperson said. Prices are rising at their fastest rate for 40 years, with UK inflation, the rate at which prices increase, at 9.1%, the highest since March 1982. It is pushing people to cut back on food shopping and car journeys due to record high fuel prices to save money. The boss of Wetherspoons, Tim Martin, said the campaign proposal was a classic example of tinkering instigated by ministers who really don't understand money. The main economic critique of this government is that it doesn't have an overarching plan, but just reacts to events like a doctor who only treats symptoms, not the cause, he added. Mr. Martin, a vocal supporter of Brexit, said eliminating tariffs on non-EU imports such as bananas, rice, coffee and children's clothes and shoes would immediately reduce prices and inflation. The British Independent Retailers Association, BIRA, said asking small retailers to reduce prices was a flawed idea. Supply chain inflation has been ahead of consumer inflation for some time, and as a result, independent retailers have been operating on reduced margins by suppressing the retail prices, said BIRA Chief Executive Andrew Goodacre. We believe that government intervention is needed to reduce prices and stimulate demand, and the best way is to reduce VAT. Meanwhile, Kate Nichols, Chief Executive of industry body UK Hospitality, said bars, hotels and restaurants were already highly price competitive, while it was also facing colossal input costs that made price reductions extremely difficult. Energy costs are up 74%, goods 55% and labour up 54%. For example, she said, while government efforts to help consumers are always welcome, the reality is that just 1 in 3 hospitality businesses are now profitable. In 2020, the government launched the Eat Out to Help Out scheme to support hospitality businesses, where diners got a state-backed 50% discount on meals and soft drinks up to £10 each on Mondays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays for a limited period. The government provided funding to hospitality businesses during this period to fund the discount. Duncan Brewer, a partner in EY Parthenon's consumer products and retail team, said price was the single most important factor in how customers choose where they shop, adding retailers were working exceptionally hard to give their customers the lowest possible price. They will be aware that raising prices by more than is absolutely necessary to keep their business afloat at this time time is a real risk. Helen Dickinson, Chief Executive of the British Retail Consortium, added many retailers were expanding their value ranges to keep the prices of essentials down and introducing discounts for vulnerable groups. The CBI, which hosted Mr. Buttres's speech, said it was vital the government continues to focus on building business confidence to help firms reduce the knock-on effects to consumers. Business will continue to work in partnership with the government to try and mitigate the impact of rising costs across the board. Tariffs on steel imports that were due to expire will be retained for a further 2 years, the government has said. International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan said the plans departed from the UK's international legal obligations but was in the national interest to protect steelmakers. She added the decision was made due to global disruptions to energy markets and supply chains. British steel producers are under pressure from soaring energy prices. Steelmaking is a key industry for some parts of the UK, where it employs 34,000 people and turns over £2 billion annually. Without controls, the government has warned the supply of steel into the UK could rise substantially, harming local manufacturers. UK Steel previously said ending the import controls could cause as much as £150 million a year in damage. Speaking at the G7 summit in Germany at the weekend, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said keeping the import controls of foreign steel would protect metal manufacturers, but there were concerns such a decision could breach international law, as the question of extending tariffs on steel imports is seen as potentially breaking World Trade Organization commitments. Mr. Trevelyan said the decision departs from our international legal obligations of the WTO agreement. However, from time to time, issues may arise where the national interest requires action to be taken, she added. The limits on steel imports were first introduced by the European Union in 2018 in response to tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. Controls were mirrored by the UK after Brexit. Restrictions, which add a tax to steel imports once a certain quota has been reached, are known as steel safeguards because they are designed to control the domestic market from surges of cheap steel from overseas. Mr. Johnson said we need British steel to be provided with much cheaper energy. The controls are currently in place for 15 categories of steel, while controls protecting 10 of those categories have already been extended to 2024. Import limits on 5 categories were set to expire on the 30th of June before the government extended them for 2 years. Mr. Trevelyan said maintaining tariffs would help defend a strategic industry and that British steel producers could face serious injury were the measures not maintained. The government is therefore actively engaged with interested parties, including those outside the UK, on the future of the UK safeguards and has listened to the concerns raised, she added. After the Supreme Court overturned citizens' constitutional right to abortion in the US, there have been concerns about data protection, particularly in the 13 states which have already moved to make ending a pregnancy illegal. But what sort of data might incriminate someone? How could the authorities get hold of it? And what are the tech firms doing about it? Gina Neff, Professor of Technology and Society at University of Oxford, tweeted the day after the ruling, "Right now, and I mean this instant, delete every digital trace of any menstrual tracking." Her message has so far received more than 200,000 likes and been retweeted 54,000 times. Period trackers are used to help women predict when their next period is likely to be and are often used to either try to prevent pregnancy or to try to conceive. There are fears that the apps could be used to punish those seeking a termination if law enforcement got hold of that data. Like a number of other high-profile apps, Natural Cycles, which is billed as a digital form of contraception, insisted last month that all the data it stored was safe and will be protected. However, on Monday it told the BBC it is working on creating a completely anonymous experience for users. The goal is to make it so that no one, not even Natural Cycles, can identify the user, it said. That sounds like it's considering encryption. Speaking of which, how about messaging services? That confidential exchange between two close friends that feels so private at the time. The use of end-to-end encryption messaging services such as WhatsApp and Signal. Telegram is not by default encrypted, although it can be. To discuss sensitive issues is generally preferred by security experts and privacy campaigners. The firms which run them cannot see the content of the messages themselves and do not receive or store them. Only the senders and recipients' devices are able to decode them. However, this is only useful if those devices are themselves not taken away or unlocked by anybody else. Generally, in the US, the police need a warrant to search an electronic device, such as a phone or laptop, just as they would be to search a house. Broadly speaking, this protection here comes under the 4th and 5th Amendments. However, there are some exceptions. Digital rights group the Electronic Frontier Foundation says US group US Police have a right search without a warrant if they have probable cause to believe there is incriminating evidence in the house or on an electronic device that is under immediate threat of destruction. Under the Fifth Amendment, which is the individual's right not to incriminate themselves, a person can refuse to unlock a device even if it's taken, but the reality is blurry according to various lawyers. Courts have reached conflicting conclusions as to whether and when the compelled decryption of a password or biometric identifier protected device runs afoul of the Fifth Amendment, wrote the Congressional Research Service in a report in 2020. And if the device itself is not seized, a subpoena from authorities to the tech firms asking for an individual's data is a powerful tool. Giants like Google and Apple not only run backup and cloud services for their customers using their own storage, but also collect their own separate user data, including internet activity and location. Google says that even after something has been deleted by a user and is therefore not visible to them, such as a browser history, some of it may still be retained to comply with legal or regulatory requirements. If these firms receive an official demand, they can challenge it, but the pressure is on for them to comply. In 2021, the New York Times reports that in the first 6 months of 2020, Apple challenged only 4% of requests for customer account data and only complied with 80 to 85%. According to Google's transparency report, it supplied some data in 82% of cases, requesting information in the first 6 months of 2021. Of almost 51,000 cases, 20,701 were subpoenas and 25,077 search warrants. Is this the time for tech firms to reconsider their data practices? Last month, a number of senior members of the US Congress, including Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, signed an open letter to Google asking it to collect and store less data about its users, including location information, out of concern that it would be used to bring about abortion prosecutions. No law requires Google to collect and keep records of its customers' every movement, they wrote. So far, the tech firms have not commented on whether they plan to make any changes to the way in which they collect and manage customer data in light of the ruling. The BBC has asked for this information. What many large US firms, including Facebook owner Meta, as well as Disney and Amazon, have said is that they will fund expenses for employees who have to travel to another state for medical care, which is not available where they are, including abortion. There is some concern that some people who live in a state where abortion is banned but travel out of state to have one may face prosecution when they return. It is unclear whether they could be the case, but is not routinely applied to other laws which vary from state to state, such as gambling. Dr. Stephanie Hare, author of the book Technology is Not Neutral, says that while the company's commitment is a welcome first step, it's not enough. That's not only going to help a very small amount of people, assuming some of them want to share this information with their employer in the first place, she said. What we need to do now is to know what these firms are going to do to limit data collection of all users and how they could prevent user data from being used against them in their social care choices. The EFF has published a privacy guide which includes this advice. Run a separate browser, phone number and email address for reproductive matters, minimize location services, and when deleting data, make sure the deleted folder is also emptied. As for researching abortion online, Professor Alan Woodward from University of Surrey believes it's unlikely that law enforcement will speculatively begin to seek this sort of personal data. They're not likely to be going after people who are thinking about having an abortion, he said, but if they are gathering evidence after the event, if they've arrested someone, that evidence could be then include browser history, emails and messages. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have paid tribute to cancer campaigner, broadcaster and former teacher Dame Deborah James, who has died aged 40. They joined celebrities, politicians and people living with cancer in praising the inspirational and unfalteringly brave mother of two. She has been receiving end-of-life care for bowel cancer at home and had raised millions for cancer research. Dame Deborah's family said she was an amazing and an inspiration. They announced her death in a post on her Instagram page. "We are deeply saddened to announce the death of Dame Deborah James, the most amazing wife, daughter, sister, mummy," it said. She passed away peacefully surrounded by her family. Her family said Dame Deborah shared her experience of cancer to raise awareness, break down barriers, challenge taboos, and change the conversation around cancer. Even in her most challenging moments, her determination to raise money and awareness was inspiring. Writing on Twitter, Prince William and Catherine said Deborah was an inspirational and unfalteringly brave woman whose legacy will live on. The host of the BBC's You, Me and the Big C podcast was first diagnosed with bowel cancer in 2016 and was given a damehood in May in recognition of her fundraising. Prince William visited her at her parents' home in Woking, Surrey, to deliver it. He praised her tireless efforts and thanked her for giving hope to those living with the disease. For her part, Dame Deborah said William's visit was surreal. You can imagine the cleaning antics and preparation went off the scale, but it was all irrelevant because William was so kind, she said. So to give you a context, what are bowel cancer symptoms? A persistent change in bowel habits, going more often with looser stools and sometimes tummy pains, blood in the stools without other symptoms such as piles, and abdominal pain, discomfort or bloating always brought on by eating. Who is eligible to get cancer screening checks? Regular bowel cancer screening is available to anyone aged 60 to 74, and this program is expanding to include everyone aged 50 to 59. This expansion is happening gradually over 4 years and has started in April last year. People in England aged 60 to 74 who are registered with a GP are automatically sent an NHS bowel cancer screening kit every 2 years. If you're outside this age group, you can still be aware of what bowel cancer symptoms are and visit your GP if you have any concerns. Dame Deborah had a no-nonsense approach to talking about cancer, having shared her experiences of treatment and daily life since her diagnosis in 2016. Signing off her final podcast in May, she said, "Check your poo. Come on, I can't leave on any other word apart from check your poo. I still have images of me dancing in poo outfits everywhere, so maybe I should leave on that final word, check your poo." A deputy head teacher, she started a cancer blog before writing for the Sun newspaper and becoming a BBC broadcaster. But on the 9th of May, she announced that she was no longer receiving active care and did not know how long she had left. "My body just can't continue anymore," she said in a post on Instagram. She also launched a new fund, Bowel Babe, to raise money for research into personalised medicine for cancer patients. It surpassed £1 million in less than 24 hours, smashing her initial goal of 250,000 and has now since raised almost 7 million. Genevieve Edwards, chief executive of Bowel Cancer UK, said the former teacher leaves a tremendous legacy behind. BBC News presenter George Alagaya, who is living with bowel cancer, recalled speaking to Dame Deborah at the Royal Marsden Hospital. He said the campaigner answered his questions about the symptoms he might experience with the illness. He was struck by Dame Deborah's sheer generosity, he said, and their chat was typical of what I now know she was capable of doing and did for so many others. Chef Rylan Riley became friends with Dame Deborah through his project Life Kitchen, which provides cookery lessons for people whose sense of taste has been affected by cancer treatments. Mr. Riley said she offered people hope. She would be that voice online that wasn't as scared as they were, and I think that really gave a lot of people a bit of comfort in a really difficult time, he said. The chef said Dame Deborah's frankness forged a connection with people that was necessary to push the cancer community forward and bring awareness. Lizzie Parry, who edited Dame Deborah's column in the Sun newspaper, said even in her final days, as she faced her death, my bonkers, beautiful and single-minded friend refused to stop. TV presenter Lorraine Kelly became emotional as she hosted a tribute to her on her ITV show earlier. She wore a pink jacket, the campaigner's favourite colour, and a t-shirt featuring the words "Rebellious Hope," which was her slogan. Kelly tweeted, "We all knew it was coming, but somehow I thought Deborah would bounce back like she always did. What a legacy she leaves behind." The number of people giving to charity in the UK has fallen sharply over the last 2 years, despite the return of in-person fundraising events, a survey suggests. The drop in donations represented a concerning trend, said the Charities Aid Foundation. CAF said 4.9 million fewer people gave to charity or sponsored someone at the start of this year compared to 2019, but people donated larger than usual sums in response to the Ukraine crisis. The CAF, an advisory group for the sector, said in March the average donation increased to 85 million, the highest the organisation has recorded, with around a third of people giving to that cause. Despite the huge generosity shown by the public to support charities helping people in Ukraine, our research shows a very concerning trend of fewer people giving to charity overall, said Neil Heslop, group's chief executive. He said overall the amount donated has also fallen, despite the return of opportunities for fundraising, such as coffee mornings and marathons following the pandemic. Sam Mercadante of the National Council for Voluntary Organisations described it as a stark picture. Charities are being squeezed by the cost of living crisis, more people are seeking support, donations are falling and inflation is eroding the value of income, she said. Among those surveyed between January and April 2022, only 57% said they donated or sponsored someone in the previous 12 months, compared to 65% in the same period in 2019. That suggested donor behaviour had reverted to its earlier trend of decline, despite an uptick in giving at the start of the pandemic. pandemic, the CAF said. Estimated $10.7 billion was given to charity in 2021, down from $11.3 billion in 2020. At the start of 2022, 57% of people said they had donated to charity, down from 62% in 2019. The most popular cause is animal welfare, with 28% of donors supporting charities in this area, and support for conservation and environmental causes has grown over the last 5 years. The CAF conducts monthly research into charitable giving by surveying thousands of individuals, then calculating estimates for the overall population. The latest report highlights the threefold pressures on the sector. The cost of living crisis that has seen prices rising at the fastest rate 40 years was prompting people to cut back, including on charitable giving. The survey suggests 1 in 12 people had already chosen not to donate, while 1 in 8 said they were likely to cut back in that area. In addition, costs were rising for the charities themselves, including through higher energy bills and staffing costs. For many charities, that comes at a time of increased demand for their services. The CAF's estimates do not include money raised through commercial activities such as charity shops. However, charities operating shops say they are struggling with the consequences of closures and a drop in the numbers of volunteers. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has said rail strikes could be easily settled by modernising antiquated working practices. He described calls for him to intervene to settle the ongoing dispute between the R&T Transport Union and rail employers as a red herring and a stunt. Outdated practices had to end for a resolution to be possible, he said. But the R&T Union said that Mr Shapps was talking complete nonsense. In an interview with the BBC, Mr Shapps acknowledged that he and the Treasury had set an overall mandate which dictated how much money was available and that he had final sign-off on what was agreed. But he said he didn't and shouldn't interfere with the detail of negotiations between the R&T and the industry, saying employers were the only people who could settle this strike. Thousands of members of the R&T who work for Network Rail and 13 train companies walked out on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday last week. Half the rail network was closed on strike days, while the knock-on impact meant services were also disrupted on the following days. The union has warned more strike action could follow. The Transport Secretary told the BBC the dispute could easily be settled because there are so many modernisations from antiquated work practices. For example, 2 vans often have to be sent to a maintenance job when only 1 van is required. The R&T said in a statement prior to Mr Shapps' comments that sending several vans is both a safety and engineering standards issue. It would be pointless sending staff to a location without their gear, equipment and tools, which is why the vehicles and associated equipment are sent to site in more than 1 van. The Transport Secretary said we want to see an upgrade to our railways, make them digital fit for the 21st century. We always also want to simultaneously need the working practices to come out of the 20th century. We can't have a digital railway and sort of steam age working practices going alongside of it. Mr Shapps accused unions of not allowing workers to fill in digital timesheets. Some train companies already have Sunday work as part of their normal rota, but he said the ones that don't need to. The R&T responded, Network Rail is intending to consult in the use of digital timesheets. We have not rejected them. We have no principled opposition to the introduction. We do use digital timesheets on other parts of the railways. It also previously said that in many companies we have agreements that Sunday forms part of the working week. The R&T has already rejected a pay offer totaling an uplift of 3%. Network Rail has insisted more would be possible if modernised working practices were accepted. It is said that 1,800 job losses that would come with those reforms could likely be achieved through voluntary redundancy, but the union is demanding a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies. Asked why a guarantee of no compulsory redundancies couldn't be put forward in writing, the Transport Secretary said it was something that R&T needed to discuss with employers. However, he added, in what business would you be able to say, we will never have to lose anyone from their jobs? He pointed out that previous voluntary redundancy schemes have been oversubscribed. Mr Shapps refused to put a figure on what pay increase would be possible if all the proposed changes to working practices were brought in, nor would he say whether 7% would be too much. He acknowledged that he knew how much money was available for a pay rise, but insisted it was a matter for the employers in the negotiations. I can't discuss it on national TV. If I were to do that, I would effectively be intervening in those discussions. However, he added, what we do know is that we've got a spike in inflation. We do not see the build in the system and end up going forward with years as it did in the 1970s. Mr Shapps did not directly respond to the question of whether the government would be prepared to put in any more money if it provided the flexibility to prevent another strike, but he They said we still have working practices which go back to the 50s and 60s and 70s, and that has to end. The strike can't be resolved without those things ending. He went on, there are so many things that are required to bring this railway up to date in terms of the working practices, then in a way that actually does provide the opportunities to get a good, decent settlement. He said because many people had spent 2 years working from home, the only people being hurt by strikes were people who have to go to work, the hospital porter, the cleaner, people with no other option. Mr. Schaap said the outcome of the dispute would affect how much fares would rise next year. If we want decently low fare rises, of course we have to have the costs of the railway lower, and that means running them more efficiently. And that's all. These working practices from the steam age that I'm afraid are time expired. Annual fare rises on regulated tickets are normally calculated using the UK RPI figure of inflation for July. RPI climbed to 11.7% in May. Next year's fare rise has not yet been determined. The UK government must drive down energy bills and reduce climate warning emissions by insulating more homes, a report says. Official advisors of the Climate Change Committee says the government's current insulation programme is shocking. It says consumers are paying £40 extra a year on bills because of previous cuts to the home renovation programme. The committee also says ministers must harness the Ukraine fuel crisis to push ahead with renewables. And it says, to be fair to poorer families, the portion of electricity bills that pays back historic renewables should be taken off bills and absorbed by the Treasury. The committee, also known as the CCC, is an independent body advising on climate policy. This report is an annual review of progress to MPs. It does praise ministers on two issues. It says the government's renewable energy programme will save people £125 a year on bills by 2030, and it congratulates ministers on promoting electric cars, even though it says more charge points and more electric vans are needed. In response to the report, the government noted that over the past 3 decades, the UK had driven down emissions faster than any other G7 country, and that it had clear plans to go further. The UK is forging ahead of most other UK countries, with around 40% of our power now coming from cleaner and cheaper renewables, it said. This is backed up by £6 billion of funding to make our homes and buildings more energy efficient, planting up to 30,000 hectares of new trees a year, and more electric cars than ever before on our road, decarbonising our cars and vans faster than any other developed country. But the CCC warned that unless housing and farming were tackled, the UK won't achieve its targets to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. The committee agrees that carbon cutting policies are now in place for most sectors of the economy, but it says there's scant evidence that these goals will be delivered, and it warns that ministers need a backup plan, including measures they may prefer to avoid, such as asking the public to change behaviour by eating less meat and flying less. The chairman, Lord Devon, told BBC News that recent climate extremes were very, very worrying. He continued, the public should be proud of the UK setting best targets, but I'm very worried that there's no convincing programme for delivering policies. I'm seriously worried that we are not moving fast enough to avert real catastrophe. Lord Devon focused on what he called a lack of sensible policy on how insulation. He said it was scandalous that house builders were still building new homes that will need retrofitting. Overall, the committee says credible plans exist for over a third of the emissions reductions needed by the mid-2030s. With luck, the UK will manage another quarter, but there's a high risk that over a third of plans won't deliver. It calls for a public engagement strategy on cutting emissions and wants analysis from the Treasury explaining how the costs and benefits of the low carbon transition will be shared. It also urges changes in tax policy and planning legislation. This year's report runs to 600 pages, 3 times longer than usual. That's because instead of relying just on reported data, this time the committee has sought evidence on the ground of the low carbon transition in action. In a briefing, the committee rejected proposals for a new coal mine in Cumbria, but said there would only be a tiny increase in emissions if old coal stations were used to keep the lights on in the winter. It said the government's ambitions on nuclear power would be very tough to accomplish. Greenpeace spokesperson Amy McCarthy said it's ironic that the CCC has named this a progress report when the government's progress on climate policy is grinding to a standstill. The longer this government drags its feet on greening our homes, delivering renewables and moving our food production system away from meat, the sharper and more costly the shift will be. Time is running out. Meanwhile, the engineering firm Atkins considers the CCC over-optimistic. Its separately published analysis shows the UK needs to build 12 to 16 gigawatts of new generation capacity each year between now and 2035. It warns the pace of new build and complexity of the challenge means a dash to decarbonise power by 2035 may no longer be a credible ambition for the UK. The CCC says that unless policies are radically explored, the government will will need to try another tack by persuading people to fly less and eat less meat. The CCC also said the government department DEFRA was guilty of magical thinking, overcutting planet heating emissions from farms. The UK's Intellectual Property Office has decided artificial intelligence systems cannot patent inventions for the time being. Patents assign the ownership of a new invention to its creator. A recent IPO consultation found many experts doubted AI was currently able to invent without human assistance. Current law allowed humans to patent inventions made with AI assistance. The government said, despite misperceptions, this was not the case. Last year, the Court of Appeal ruled against Stephen Taylor, who had said his Davos AI system should be recognised as the inventor in 2 patent applications for a food container and a flashing light. The judges sided by a 2-to-1 majority with the IPO, which had told him to list a real person as the inventor. Only a person can have rights, a machine cannot, wrote Lady Justice Laying in her judgment. A patent is a statutory right and it can only be granted to a person. But the IPO also said it would need to understand how our IP system should protect AI-devised inventions in the future, and committed to advancing international discussions with a view to keeping the UK competitive. In July 2021, in a case also brought by Mr. Thaler, an Australian court decided AI systems could be recognised as inventors for patent purposes. Days earlier, South Africa had issued a similar ruling. Many AI systems are trained on large amounts of data copied from the internet. And on Tuesday, the IPO also announced plans to change copyright law to allow anyone with lawful access, rather than only those conducting non-commercial research, as now to do this to promote the use of AI technology and wider data mining techniques for the public good. Rights holders will still be able to control and charge for access to their works, but no longer charge extra for the ability to mine them. An increasing number of people are using AI tools such as DALL-E 2 to create images resembling a work of human art. Mr. Thaler has recently sued the US Copyright Office over its refusal to recognise a software system as the author of an image, the Register reported. In the consultation, the IPO noted the UK was one of the only handful of countries to protect computer-generated works with no human creator. The author of a computer-generated work is defined as the person by whom the arrangements necessary for the creation of the work are undertaken, it says, and protection lasts for 50 years from when the work is made. Performing Arts Workers Union Equity has called for copyright law to be changed to protect actors' livelihoods from AI content such as deepfakes generated from images of their face or voice. The IPO took this issue seriously, it said, but at this stage the impacts of AI technologies on performance remains unclear. We will keep these issues under review. The UK will provide an additional £1 billion in military aid for Ukraine, a near doubling in its support for the fight against the Russian invasion. The new funding takes the military aid given to Kiev to £2.3 billion, and the UK has also spent £1.5 billion in humanitarian aid and economic support for Ukraine. Boris Johnson said British spending was transforming Ukraine's defences. The pledge came after President Zelensky urged NATO leaders to do more to help Ukraine's war efforts. Mr. Zelensky told NATO leaders the monthly cost of defence for Ukraine was around $4.12 billion. The UK is second only to the US in terms of military aid for Ukraine. The US recently approved a £33 billion package of support. Initially, the UK supplied Ukraine with anti-tank missiles, but now it is providing more heavy weaponry. The new British aid will go towards paying for sophisticated air defence systems, drones, electronic warfare equipment, and thousands of pieces of vital kit, the UK government said. The new £1 billion is set to come from departmental underspends, the UK government said, plus £95 million from the Welsh and Scottish government's budgets. An underspend means departments spent less than anticipated, not that government finances were in surplus overall. Public sector borrowing was £151.8 billion in the year ending March 2022, according to the Office for National Statistics. Announcing the extra support, the government claimed the equipment was the first step to helping Ukraine recover territory lost to Russia on top of their valiant defence. But questions remain about whether the aid will be sufficient. Addressing NATO leaders at their summit in Madrid on Wednesday via video link, Zelensky said they needed more modern weapons, systems and artillery to break the Russian artillery advantage. Russia still receives billions every day and spends them on war. We have a multi-billion-dollar deficit. We don't have oil and gas to cover it, Mr. Zelensky said. Also speaking in the Spanish capital, Mr. Johnson said Putin's brutality continues to take Ukrainian lives and threaten peace and security across Europe. As Putin fails to make the gains he had intended anticipated and hoped for, and the futility of this war becomes clear to all. Its attacks against the Ukrainian people are increasingly barbaric. UK weapons, equipment and training are transforming Ukraine's defences against this onslaught. Britain has been at the forefront of the international effort to supply arms to Ukraine. It was one of the first countries to do so, but Boris Johnson's claim that UK weapons, equipment and training are transforming Ukraine's defences is still a bold one. The US is spending considerably more. Nearly half of the $40 billion it's giving Ukraine is for military support. Some smaller nations such as Estonia have spent a larger portion of their income, and Ukraine still says it's not getting enough. Its deputy defense minister recently claimed it only received a tenth of the weapons it's asked for. For example, Ukraine says it needs hundreds of multiple rocket launchers. The US, UK and Germany have so far promised to send around a dozen. Ukraine's military is still heavily reliant on older Soviet-era weaponry, and the transfer of Western weapons has been slow and incremental. Britain has also had to source some of what it's sending from third countries, a sign that there's not a lot left in the cupboard. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss told the BBC the UK's contribution would enable the Ukrainians to succeed, as they are not just fighting for themselves, they are fighting for all of us. But when asked if £1 billion was anywhere near enough, the amount needed by Ukraine, she said the UK was helping the nation kickstart its economy and reconstruct. She added, "It's not a blank check and we are providing specific amounts of funding. We've been very clear with them, we will not let them down. We will continue to support them in the long term in whichever way we can, in a way that we can afford." The UK's commitment comes as the members of NATO agreed a 10-year strategic concept to address future threats to European and global security. At the same time, the US government announced it will increase its military presence across Europe as NATO agreed a fundamental shift in its response to Russia's invasion. The UK currently spends around 2.3% of GDP on defence, which is above the 2% target set by NATO and among the highest of member nations. However, the defence budget has been the source of tension between Number 10 and Ministry of Defence, and would calls for more funding for the armed forces. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told reporters in Madrid, "To be fair, Number 10 does say if you include the extra Ukrainian spend, they've put a sort of caveat to that. Because, of course, isn't core defence spending. I mean, it is not my core budget. It doesn't buy me any more planes, tanks or ships." Mr Wallace added it was obliquely helping Britain's defences because we're helping Ukraine. But Labour's Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey said government plans to cut another 10,000 soldiers from the army was embarrassing for the UK. He told the BBC's Radio 4 Today programme, "It's not responding to the greater threats we face, and it's putting at risk our NATO obligations." But he declined to answer if a Labour government would spend more on defence. As well as providing aid, the UK is also training Ukrainian troops. The UK trained more than 22,000 members of the Ukrainian armed forces as part of Operational Orbit Tour, which ran from 2015 until the invasion in February. And earlier this month, Mr Johnson announced a new UK-led training programme for Ukrainian forces, which will take place overseas. The MOD said it has the potential to train up to 10,000 troops every 120 days. Over the past few weeks, more than 450 Ukrainian troops have been receiving training in Wiltshire to operate the weapons provided by the UK. In news, a woman who has been killed in a street attack in East London believed every woman should be able to walk home, her family have said. Zara Alina was on Cranbrook Road in Ilford, 10 minutes from her home, when she was attacked on Sunday. In a statement, her family said their loss was irreparable, adding she walked. Zara believed that a woman should be able to walk home. Jordan McSweeney has appeared before magistrates charged with her murder. Mr McSweeney, who is also accused of the attempted rape of the 35-year-old and robbery of her mobile phone, keys and handbag, spoke only to confirm his name, date of birth and address at Thames Magistrates Court. The 29-year-old from Church Elm Lane, Dagenham, East London, indicated no plea and was remanded in custody to appear at the Old Bailey on the 27th of July. Miss Alina's family have paid tribute to her in a statement describing her as a joy to all of us. They said she was always the bigger person in any situation. She was authentic and refused to try and impress anyone, but she impressed us. She was the rock of our family. Zara was stoic and held it all together and never complained. She glued our community together. Some family members were also in court for the hearing. Paramedics were called at about 2:45 British Standard Time on Sunday after Miss Alina, who lived locally, was found by members of the public. A post-mortem examination revealed she had multiple serious injuries. Miss Alina's family added, "We must prevent and stop violence against women and girls." The family described their loss as irreparable, adding that the void feels insurmountable, but the warmth and kindness that our community has shown is is testament to the power of Zara's spirit. Her friends have said she was so soft and gentle, she never had a bad word to say about anyone. They said she graduated in October after extensive studying and had only been working at the Royal Courts of Justice for a few weeks. Zara, 35, a beloved human, child, niece, cousin, granddaughter, friend to all. She was a joy to all of us. She was a carer for her mother and her grandmother. Caring for others came so naturally to her. Zara was friendly, she was everybody's friend, she was everybody's daughter, everybody's niece, everybody's sister, everybody's cousin. She was pure of heart. She was a joy to all of us, her sparkling eyes and curly jet black hair, her glorious laughter and her sweet, smiling voice. Her tiny frame embodied a passionate spirit and indomitable energy. Zara was brought up by the whole of her family. She was our love in human form. At the age of 5, she said she was going to be a lawyer. Shrieking with joy when she spotted the birds as a child, she would giggle and make us laugh. She was always the bigger person in any situation. She was authentic and refused to try and impress anyone, but she impressed us. She was the rock of our family. Zara was stoic and held it all together and never complained. She glued our community together. Nobody worked harder than Zara, is what we heard from all who knew her. Zara was happy, and at a point in her life when her joy was radiating and blossoming, she was ready to make a family of her own. Her sense of justice and fairness led her to a life of giving and caring for others, supporting refugees fleeing violence, giving voice to those who had less power. She had that special habit of noticing others in need and always put their needs on her agenda. A carefree spirit with the most caring heart. Zara was happy, and at a point in her life that she had worked hard for. She had completed her legal practice course so that she could practice as a solicitor. She only recently started working for the Crown Prosecution Service to complete her 2-year work placement in order to become a fully qualified solicitor. She was fierce. She didn't just survive, she thrived. She walked everywhere. She put her party shoes in a bag and donned her trainers. She walked. Zara believed that a woman should be able to walk home. Now her dreams of a family are shattered, her future brutally taken. Sadly, Zara is not the only one who has had her life taken at the hands of a stranger. We all know women should be safe on our streets. She was in the heart of her community, 10 minutes from home. We all need to be talking about what happened to our Zara. We all need to be talking about this tragedy. These last few days have been shocking and unimaginable. In a savage, sickening act, she was murdered by a stranger. She's not the only woman who has lost her life like this. In the moment of this tragedy, we extend our deepest sympathy and love to the families of Bieber Henry, Nicole Smallman, Sarah Everard, Sabina Nessa, Aisling Murphy, and many, many more women. We must prevent and stop violence against women and girls. Our loss is irreparable and the void feels insurmountable, but the warmth and kindness that our community has shown is testament to the power of Zara's spirit. Her life has been stolen from us. She has been stolen from us all. Rest in power, Zara and Natasha Alina.